Good morning, Council. We've got two large items to cover today. The first items I'm going to start with are department requests and capital item requests that what I would call significant increases from last year's budget. I know that the mayor has requested revenue items. Those revenue items were still pinning down on some of those revenue items, but I can tell you overall, I do not anticipate a significant difference in the 2018-19 revenue than what we had for 2017-18. I know my projections may be a little less than what they were last year. I'm doing that simply for my own internal reasons so that I can make sure that we have exactly what we need before I present the final budget to you on April 10th. Here are the total budget requests for fiscal year 18-19. $7.1 million is capital budget request. I will tell you, out of that 7.1, I have an inflated number in there for the Bristol baseball field that we can discuss in a little more detail here shortly. The total capital request is going to be $18.7 million. For that line item. Operating and department request is $1.384 million, which is over and above what was requested for certain line items last year. As we start out, we'll start with capital request. I've got this broken down into public safety and then other requests. You can see the Sheriff's Department has three items totaling roughly $122,000. Southern Software, that is their software upgrade, that is a necessary upgrade that needs to be paid this year, the $37,876. There was no state or federal funds that would match that. They are also requesting two new vehicles, which would cost $66,000, and they are also requesting an X-ray inspection system. Depending on what we do in regards to a regional jail would determine whether or not they would need the X-ray inspection system and could potentially make a determination as to whether or not two new vehicles would be appropriate for the Sheriff's Department. The Fire Department, they have a capital request of $150,000 for an alerting system. That is a new alerting system that would need to be implemented so that all stations are live all at the same time in order for dispatch to get in touch with every station at the exact same time. The next item they are requesting is a large diameter supply hose, which would cost $80,000. There is a request for $41,000 for 6 automatic defibrillators. If we put up $41,000, the feds will pay $164,000 for those defibrillators as well. That would be a total request of $205,000. They're requesting 5 sets of personal protective equipment. That's basically their firefighting gear for $11,500. Mobile and portable radios, they have applied for a grant which would cover the vast majority of that. So for a $21,000 investment from the city, we would receive $448,000 worth of equipment that would be paid for. The difference would be paid for by the federal government of $426,000. They're requesting to upgrade the kitchen at Fire Station 1. They expect that to cost $10,000. They can do the majority of the work themselves. They're a very handy group of guys and can upgrade that kitchen themselves. So the vast majority of that $10,000 would be for cabinets, sinks, refrigerators, a stove, and a dishwasher. And it may cost less than $10,000, but I think that's a reasonable number at this point. They are asking for a rescue pumper to replace engine 3. They will be applying for a grant. If the grant was awarded, $665,000 of that would come from the federal government. And also, if they need a new aerial ladder truck. Our ladder truck is not necessarily in a state of disrepair to the degree that it cannot be used, but the ladder has failed inspection, which they are working on getting that remedied, but that will be a costly repair as well. Plus that ladder truck, I believe, is close to 20-some years old. And if the city would match, there would be a $49,000 outlay from the city for the ladder truck, and there will be a federal grant potential for $931,000 from the feds for that ladder truck. The police department is asking for dispatch consoles, which costs $150,000. And let me say something real quick before we go any further. Some of these items I would consider, one, very critical items. Not all of them are extremely critical. And it's my experience from what I've seen, things have not been appropriately appropriated over the past to build in these budget items that for our departments to work efficiently and effectively. So over the past, these items should have been, this is going to my 3- and 5-year and 10-year forecast for financial planning. These items need to be considered by each council looking forward 3, 5, and 10 years, so you can appropriately budget for these items when these items come up. Here's some other capital requests. There will be a Lee Highway widening phase, phase 2. That will be paid for by state and federal funds. Also, phase 1B of Lee Highway exit 5 is state and federal funds. The Fairview Street Bridge rehab is paid for by the state of $280,000. Piedmont Avenue and State Street pedestrian signal will be paid for by state and federal funds. There is a shared use sidewalk near Paulina and Bonham Road. The local government would put in $13,322. The state would pay $644,000, and the feds would pay $127,000. You will see Lee Highway exit 5. That is a $750,000 request that I would consider a critical need. That is based upon the previous widening in the exit 5 area, where we are currently in litigation with 2 businesses at that location. The state will match whatever the locality has to pay. There's some drainage improvements of $150,000, and Mr. McCulloch is here. He can discuss those if y'all have any questions about where those drainage improvements would be. If you want to just give them a quick update.
Those are really just to kind of cover for things that come up that may or may not happen. They're just to help us if something does happen. We probably won't need it, but it's there because a lot of stuff can be covered out of maintenance funds. But if it's outside of that realm on a road that they don't cover, or some other reason, that we may need that money. We've typically had that amount in there each year. We don't always get to it, and we're going to try not to, obviously.
The streets division is requesting a new zero-turn mower, which would cost approximately $10,100. And I will go ahead and skip the baseball field at the moment. We'll go down to the bus purchase. The state or the locally, we would have to pay $8,000. The state would pay an additional $8,000. The feds would pay $64,000 on a bus purchase. So that capital request would be $80,000. And back to our baseball field.
What's the bus for? Is it the transit system? What is it for?
Transit. As you see, I have a $5.5 million capital request for the baseball field. Now, everyone in this room knows that's unrealistic today. However, this is an item that has been discussed in detail with myself and Bristol Baseball. There is, from Pittsburgh, they have concerns about the field condition, about the clubhouse condition, and that is a major concern to the folks in Pittsburgh. In order to appropriately have a short-term fix for the baseball field, that would require approximately $450,000 this year, which would be synthetic grass and an upgrade to the clubhouse in order to satisfy, I believe, the powers that be in Pittsburgh. I've discussed this in detail, as I said, with Bristol Pirates. I know Mr. Main and Mr. McCulloch have looked into this. They have discussed it with Mr. Luttrell. This is something that we need to look at and something we need to start thinking about, because at some point there will be a situation where the baseball team may move from its current location, and it may be sooner rather than later unless we have a significant outlay of funds in order to remedy that situation. Now, in regards to the baseball field, if you go in and you put in synthetic grass for that field and you upgrade it appropriately, other events could be held at that baseball field. You could have concerts, other types of sporting events, if you had the proper outlay, if the baseball field was laid out properly. So there's other sources of revenue that could be used for that baseball field. Plus, I do believe that the Virginia High School League could consider that baseball field for tournaments deeper on in their season, which would be a increase in traffic to the Bristol area, hotels and restaurant lodging. So there are benefits to upgrading that baseball field. I know that this is, we're looking at this from a 36,000 foot view today, but this is something that we do need to start thinking about in the very near future and how we want to proceed with that baseball field. I think everyone has, well, several years ago it was tossed about that we build a new baseball stadium in conjunction with Bristol, Tennessee, and I think the cost of that stadium is going to be $20 to $25 million. That is not something that I don't think we could realistically commit ourselves to at this point unless we had donations from the community and from individuals who'd be willing to put that type of cash outlay for a baseball field for this city. I don't know where your thoughts are on this, but
Well, my first question is just what was last year's capital? What's this year's capital actual look like? And let's just get everybody on the same playing field on what we've spent the last year or two on capital and where we are this year.
my sheet doesn't have it pulled up right.
Wouldn't want to play in the infield with some heavy ground. That's the point. How did Tennessee High fund their football field?
All right, last year's was 9.9 million, and 301,000 of that was from our general fund. So the vast
How much was from general?
301,000.
300K from the general fund.
$9 million worth of capital improvement.
And
That's
that was,
correct.
Was that last year's budget?
Well, that was the budget amount. That's
Okay,
correct.
so how much has actually been spent against that?
As of today,
And also, my question would be, is that 9.6 that's federal and state?
that is federal and state funding.
9.6 total? 9.6.
That's what you're trying to find, what the actual is.
Mr. Eads, through the end of January, 4.7 in revenue for the Capital Projects Fund, 2.4 in expenditures, leaving a positive balance of 2.3 million roughly. Of that, the majority is sitting in a capital projects restricted cash. It's what's it's bond proceeds that are going toward these projects that haven't been spent down yet.
Okay, go through that really slow and explain it, explain each one of them real quick.
Okay,
The 4.7, the 2.4, and the balance,
okay.
and the restricted again.
Yes, 2.3 is,
For what? Just anything, it's not earmarked for anything specific, right?
it's earmarked,
For capital projects that were approved in last year's budget.
yes,
Hadn't spent the money yet.
Correct.
right.
Right, so it can be spent against anything, it's just
Not
restricted.
against anything, I'm sorry, the majority of it is falls related, the interior
Well, that's my
road.
question, so if you got 2.3 set aside, it's restricted, what's it restricted for? Is there any specific projects? So
The vast majority of this is falls-related activities and road projects in that area of the city.
So it's earmarked, we have nothing.
That's correct.
And so how much was in the restricted again?
About
Two-
2.3 the end of January.
Okay, and we've spent basically 2.4, is that what you said? 4.7's come into us from state, local, whatever sources. and
That's
then we've-
correct.
We've spent 2.4 million.
That's correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right, so what are you projecting by the end of the year? That 2.4 gonna be, are we gonna spend up to 3.5? What are you seeing between now and the end of June?
That depends on, I think a lot of it depends on the area around Lee Highway as to what's been spent and what that timeline is as far as getting the project completed.
We need an estimate, $1 million, $500,000, what do you think?
Wallace?
3 million, 3 to 4 million.
So 2.4 is already spent, another 3. Is that what you're thinking on top of that between now and end of June?
Total for Lee Highway will be about around 3 to 4 million. I don't know what, we've probably spent maybe a million on Lee Highway.
Okay, so you think another 2 will be spent between now and the end
Yeah,
of
at
fiscal
least-
year?
Yeah, another 2 to 3.
Okay. So that'll take us up to 4.4 to 5.4. And some still is to come in on that too, revenues to come in to help pay for that road
Yeah,
project.
all that is reimburses.
All
All that
that.
3 to 4 million is gonna be reimbursed, yes.
Okay, so all that's reimbursable, okay.
The big ticket item that was budgeted for in 17-18 was 6.7 million for Lee Highway widening Phase 2. 6.7 million was budgeted for that.
Okay, so we think by the end of June, the city would be facing only outlays from our funds of,
301,000 is what was budgeted.
that's it, okay. But the total, which includes state and federal, right, could be
Correct.
upwards of 4 to 5 million in total.
Correct,
2.4 is already, another 2 to 3,
correct.
so 4 to 5 total, only 300 out of the general fund,
That's what we budgeted for.
okay? So this budget you're showing then, the local, would be out of our general fund.
That's correct.
So even if you back the 5.5 million out, it's still
If you back the
5 times what we've spent this year.
that's correct.
Okay.
That's,
All right, now let me ask one more question before we get into that discussion. Debt service, we need to keep, anytime we're talking capital, the city's got a debt load, right? What's our current total maximum legal debt service? Where are we actually? And what's the availability on total debt service?
For fiscal year 17-18, the total maximum is $5.2 million.
Now, the city can only borrow up to 108
Oh, you're talking about what's left over.
Yeah.
We're roughly $5 million is what we could borrow.
We only have 5 million availability, legal availability.
That's correct.
Okay, and that includes everything the IDA's got on the books, everything the city's got on the books.
That's correct.
Okay.
We have maxed out our credit
So
card.
7.1 million doesn't even work against the maximum, even if we said we would spend the maximum, it wouldn't work.
That's correct.
All right, I've got you, now I got the picture. Now, questions? No, I just wanna know, everybody needs that picture, now we can get into,
Make sure I understand correctly, it is early in the morning, you said we're 5 times, did I understand that number, 5 times more than we had capital this year, even backing out the,
If you back out 5.5 from the 7.1, that leaves you $1.6 million, which is roughly a little more than 5 than the 301,000 that we budgeted for this past year. Now, where does this problem come from? This problem comes from I'm gonna say it, we've kicked the can down the road. And we've kicked it so far, it's somewhere west of the Mississippi River right now.
be specific when you say, what particular can?
Well, in general, I don't think the city has properly budgeted for items that they need to for future years. It has been, we'll borrow this year to pay for a lawnmower. We'll lease a lawnmower for $9,000 for 5 years. You know, we'll borrow.
we get that, we
you
get
know,
that.
so
So
I mean-
let's don't go there, we get that, we understand that really. So let's talk about, on this list, what's absolutely critical that's been on that kick the can down the road. Is the lawnmower one of them? Is the
On this list here,
drainage ditches, you know, what's absolutely keeping people up at night? What
I
is
will
keeping
go
you
ahead-
up at night?
I will give you, if you want, when I state one of these items, you can put an asterisk beside it because it's an absolute critical funding request. We'll start with the second payment for Southern Software that is due based on a contract.
Okay? That's contractual, all right?
That's contractual, that's correct. Mobile and portable radios for the fire department and
I
the
gotta
5.
catch up with you, where's that at?
It's,
That's,
start with 5 sets of personal protective equipment.
5 sets, okay, 5 sets of PPE, 11,500?
Yes. The,
Are
and-
those replacements? Are we replacing things or are these
you would
new
be
items?
replacing some of those items,
Okay.
yes.
Order replace can.
5 sets of PPE.
Right, we did. And with the number of firefighters we had, not everyone had a replacement suit, you know, when we replaced the ones last year.
I know that those were, definitely had to be replaced because they were past the 10-year age limit.
Correct.
So that
These are moving up on that 10-year
are
limit.
these five replacing 5 units that are over 10 years old?
I don't think they're quite 10 right now, but they will be in the very near future.
But that gets to your point of you gotta anticipate this and start building this in and getting a rotational schedule.
That's correct.
So that you're not faced with a big backlog like we have been.
Okay,
in the
what's
past.
next?
The next critical need is their mobile and portable radios. We there's no guarantee, but I fully anticipate we would get grant funding for that, which would require $21,000 from the city. And the other two, I wouldn't consider them a true asterisk, but it is critical. I wouldn't say very critical. That would be the rescue pumper and the aerial ladder. And if we get grant funding for those items, that is roughly a $85,000 outlay from the city.
80? Where you come up with 85?
Between the rescue engine 3 and the aerial.
Oh, the two added together?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a good deal.
So, of those items right there, 37 plus 11.5, plus 21.3, plus 35, plus 49, 154,000. All right, so what's the next tier? Not critical, but
Well,
the
we
next
haven't
most
finished
important.
critical yet.
Oh, okay. All right, I'm up to 154.
All right. I would not necessarily consider dispatch consoles very critical, but they are critical, whether we fund it this year or whether we fund it. It's going to have to be funded within the next 2 years, one way or the other. And there's a possibility we could work out some sort of contractual agreement where we pay half this fiscal year.
What
half.
is it per 150, I'm assuming covers X number of consoles, right? So how many is this, 10, 15 consoles, what?
That, right, when you talk dispatch consoles, each dispatcher has 2 to 3 consoles that they're working from, and there's four larger consoles within those consoles. So you're looking at 10 to 12.
Okay. So they're about 10 grand, 12 grand a piece.
That's
something like
correct.
that. Do you have to
What about
buy,
leasing?
do you have to buy 4 at a time to outfit one station?
Lieutenant Robinette could better answer that question.
Is that something you
Gotta
can
get it,
phase in, or do you have to do them all at once? I mean, to keep everybody on the same system?
With our new software upgrade, it would be best to have it all done at once. I'm sure it could be phased in, but there would probably be some sort of
Understood.
issues
Yeah.
with that.
All right. So if you do it all at once, now you're up to 303 or 304.
Correct. And then the last, what I would consider critical on this page is the $750,000 for the Lee Highway project.
So explain that one again. What are we
Okay.
going to do there? That's exit 5 where
This
Black
is
Wolf
exit 5, where
overpass right in there.
Crabtree, and we're in current litigation with Crabtree Buick and with Atlas Honda. This, I'm not exactly certain as to why this was not budgeted for in previous years, but this is an item that we're going to be forced to pay for the taking of a portion of their property. That's just the way it is. And as I said, we are in current litigation with them. We have been through mediation.
So we took more than what was in the right of way,
Well, yes, we had to take more than what was in the right of way.
and that wasn't taken through proper legal channels?
No, it was taken through proper legal channels. It just wasn't budgeted for. I think they budgeted, if I'm not mistaken, $250,000 in last year's budget for this, and that was not a reasonable budget number based on what the property value is worth and what the appraisals were coming back at. The appraisals,
Properties look 10 times better than what they were before.
I know, the properties look better than they've ever looked.
Yeah.
right.
So, how many feet from the road into the property did we take?
At Crabtree, we took roughly was it 20? Okay. We took 20 feet at Crabtree, and then at Atlas, we took quite a bit from Atlas.
Yeah, probably more like 30, 40.
Right.
Plus, it sort of, it sloped gently up to the road, and now it's shoved that slope further back into the property, so it's steeper as you come back. We ended up building that wall in front of them too.
Areas they weren't ever using.
Well,
So
the problem is Atlas Honda had a big, huge warehouse facility sitting there, and when we widened the road, we took the building and they had to tear it down. And that building was tax assessed at well over $500,000, and there lies the problem.
So,
So anything, your budget is to pay for the city taking the property?
That's
Because we gotta
correct.
get it at fair market value, right?
that's correct.
So that was never budgeted in prior years?
It was budgeted, but not to the appropriate
Well, I
amount that it
guess
should have
it
been budgeted for.
They budgeted 250, you're thinking it'd be 500,000.
Right.
Since the state was paying half, just like they are here.
Okay, we just under budgeted for it.
It's just that I guess now further negotiations have indicated that ain't gonna be enough.
Well, you know, prior to last year's budget season, the appraisals from, you know, a reputable commercial appraiser who does this type of work, both of the appraisals for each one of those properties was over $1 million as to what the cost was for the city, or what the damage was done to each one of those businesses. So it was over $1 million for each one of those items, which puts us on the hook. If you assume that you give them the maximum value on their appraisal, the city would have been on the hook for $1 million.
Has the city already paid them an amount that
The
the city?
city's paid $179,000, I believe, to Crabtree Buick at this time, and roughly $160,000 to Atlas Honda. Those numbers may be off a few thousand, but
And that's less than the city agreed to pay?
well, the city hadn't agreed to pay anything. When you go through a taking, there's a process that the city and the defendant have to go through. And the defendant is going to say, our property's worth this, the city's going to say, your property is not worth that, it's worth this. And then basically you're getting into a negotiation as to what the appropriate amount is for that property that's been taken. If you cannot come to terms, then you go to court, you put your experts on, and then the judges will make a final decision as to what that value of the property was worth. And then you'll be writing a check for whatever the judge.
So that was never done before the road was done?
That's,
Both parties never agreed to the value before
That's
the road was
correct.
put in? I don't get, how is that even allowed to be done?
well, that's part of the process. It doesn't have to be paid for immediately. That's the way the process is set up. It's a statutory scheme. You don't have to pay for the property prior to the taking.
We paid based on the appraisals that we received, and those were approved. And so we did a take because they didn't agree to that, which we're allowed to do. And so then after that, they come back and say, no, you didn't pay us enough, so they'll take us to court or sue us for
So
what
you
they
say
believe their
approved to
property is valued at.
approved.
There's an initial appraisal that we have that says we think the value of the property is worth X. So then we put those funds into an account with the receiver with the court. And if they agree to it, great. And if they don't, then that starts that next process where other appraisers are involved, where they have their own appraiser, and then you start the process.
Okay, I got a question. You've been here for a while. Those appraisals, you saw those appraisals when they came in.
Yes.
How did those appraisals line up with the taxes on those properties?
I believe that they came in below, which at the time I wasn't.
They came in significantly below. Because I'm of the understanding that that building that Atlas had was tax assessed at well over $500,000. Now, how do you get $150,000, $160,000 appraisal?
And I'd have to go back and look. At the time, I wasn't aware of the appraisal. And maybe I should have known better, but I had assumed that the appraisers would have looked at that. But apparently they didn't.
Did that include the warehouse maybe?
The warehouse.
The ones
That warehouse
went away,
was
the
For
appraisal
years
was
and
not
years,
down.
this man has been paying a high tax base on that building.
So the appraisers,
He was allowed to come and protest.
Absolutely.
so the appraisers undervalued the property because they didn't look at the warehouse potentially.
Yeah. And we used VDOT approved appraisers, and so I had no reason to not trust their numbers.
So then they would be party to any litigation, I would assume.
That's why they're willing
What
to
was
pay
that?
that.
Would they be party to any litigation?
Unless we called them as a witness. I mean, they're not liable for the.
Have we budgeted for litigation?
That would, yes, that's been budgeted for, and then, litigation expenses are not that expensive at this time. And this is where, after we got into it, I think I'd sent you all an email probably back in, August maybe, in regards to hiring an expert, because VDOT has a significant interest in this fact. VDOT has suggested that we contract with Ron Ayers, an attorney in Roanoke. I'd sent an email out to you all suggesting that. At that time, you all agreed that since VDOT is footing the vast majority of this bill, it would be, and Mr. Ayers, basically all he does is right-of-way work across the
Well, I didn't mean
entire
to
state.
distract us, so whatever you and the attorney and the appraiser and all agreed to, she's gotta put some liability on the books.
That's correct.
But, so this year has to have some liability on the books of
That's
whatever the reasonable
that's the
amount.
$750,000.
We think that's the liability, that's fixing the thing, right? Or is that paying?
Well, the
That's
total
paying.
liability is
Okay, that's just
projected
paying
at 1.5. That's
So we
just
think
paying.
that's our liability if we were to lose the litigation.
I think that's a reasonable number.
Well, that's not really capital. Capital's where you outlay the money, you build the road. This
Well-
is litigation expense that doesn't belong in the capital plan.
But it ties back to the Lee Highway Road project.
Yeah, I get that.
I understand what you're saying, that it's not capital, but
It's not
when
capital,
it
it's
comes
not an
down
asset.
to,
It's not a capital expense, but
It's
it's
not a
for
capital
a
asset, you
capital.
put a
it's
number
part of
on
the
it.
But
capital
it's for a
project.
capital project.
That's correct.
Is there any, I mean, I assume we paid this amount, or any, you mentioned before with the falls, there's some excess bond proceeds that could offset some of this?
Yes, and I believe the plan is, once the project is complete, remaining bond proceeds will be available to cover this.
But you don't know
No,
what that amount
I don't
will be?
anticipate it will be $750,000. I think it will be less than $500,000.
Okay.
All right, we left off with the capital at the dispatch consoles. You went to the road. Now, what else on the list is, you think
That's
is
what
really
I would,
important?
that's what I would consider critical needs for this fiscal year.
So if we don't do the zero-turn mower, we're still gonna be able to mow the grass.
I think we can get by with
What that's for, Michael Main would like to replace a Kubota mower with a zero turn because he feels like he can be more efficient, get more done in less time than with that other mower. So I guess he hopes to be able to sell that.
Well, there's no
mower.
doubt about that. You can mow a lot faster, but I think 10,000 is a lot. I bought a zero-turn for what I need to do. That wasn't $10,000.
That's probably, for commercial,
Yeah.
that's about the right price.
Yeah, when you get into commercial, that's about the starting price.
I noticed
I hear that all the time.
I drove up
You gotta
Euclid
decide whether it's a really a
last
commercial need or
week.
not. You're just mowing, flipping grass.
one guy knew to mow,
Seriously.
throws the grass into the median, the other guy didn't and went all the way up and threw grass all out in the street, which hurts the sewer setup.
Okay.
Just gotta remind them
You
to
know, can't be,
mow in different directions, so the grass is always thrown into the median, not out on the street.
I'll send out a reminder.
all right, what else on the list you think is really important or overlooked?
As far as critical needs for this year, that's it.
The,
The AED monitors, defibrillators is not a, I mean, that's a, when I look at safety items, that kind of pops off the page at me.
We get money back on that one too.
That one, I would have to double check with the fire departments if that's a critical need, and they may be at their expiration date, because those do have an expiration date.
Are you getting a lot of that paid for by the
You
feds?
get a lot of it paid for by the Fed, so we could probably consider that a critical need.
That's a 5-to-1 ratio.
the bus purchase, is that a new bus, or is that to
That would be a
replace?
new bus.
For the state to pay $644,000 for the sidewalks, we only pay 13, seems like a, you know,
That, I don't consider it a critical need, but I think for the return on the investment, that's worth throwing.
it's not
something-
critical, but for return on investment, it is a
return on
safety
investment.
item. We've had a lot of people talking about sidewalks and the ability for pedestrians to move back and forth.
And that's something
so
you guys approved a few months back too.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
So that has to be budgeted then if we approve
Yes.
this. Okay.
And we'll be able to use offset with our own staff to cover that fund there.
So that's really a soft expense, that's
That-
not a hard,
Not a true cash outlay.
Yes,
okay,
Have-
so
have
you can
we-
use personnel,
yeah.
okay.
Have we looked at a plan for the flood deal like Tennessee has and a lot of other cities are having where they're charging people based on their amount of water they're contributing to the
That's actually,
sewer system?
that's actually an item that will be coming to your attention in the very near future. I think
Okay.
it was brought to council's attention previously. It was tabled, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was about a year and a half ago.
And
Yeah.
due to a letter that we have received from the DEQ, they have given us a very, they've given us a suggestion that we need to consider that stormwater management fee.
Yeah.
So the sheriff's department vehicle and x-ray inspection's not critical?
What do you say?
The sheriff's department's vehicle and x-ray,
I would not consider those two critical items at this point.
all right?
Unless we keep the jail, then they may become critical.
So the x-ray, again, is that replacing what's currently at the
They don't even have
courthouse,
an
or is
X-ray.
it?
They have no x-ray machine.
All right, so now we talked about the
Well,
critical.
this
Scanner going in court, is this court security or is
This
this
would-
inside the jail?
This would be court security from what I've been told.
Courthouse
X-ray machine anyway, we,
So-
they don't need that to be, we don't need to be X-rayed.
I
Deal with that. Seriously. And go in it many times, that's,
Okay, so if we talked about the
Can't fall
critical
out.
items,
it's significant.
what on here would you pick to say so it's not a kick the can down the road, it's considered an important planning item, it's not critical. We talked about the criticals, that's about $300,000,
Right.
give or take, which is in line with what we had last year. So now what would you say is important to plan for?
The fire station alerting system and the large diameter supply hose,
Fire station alerting system, that's the 150,000?
that's 150,000 plus
230
80,000.
for us, but yeah, no, it's,
And the large diameter fire hose is 80. Those two items?
Though, from the fire department, which what we would need to continue to budget for, those would be two items that I would consider we need to start planning for.
And if you had to pick and choose between the two, which one would you pick?
I think they're both equally important.
I said if you had to. You can't get both, you only get one. Which one would you pick?
I would go with the alerting system.
Okay.
Well, and one thing, I mean, if you budget this money and say for some, just for purposes of a budget, because the numbers work pretty close, say for some reason you didn't get the federal grants for the 2 fire trucks, then you'd already have the money set aside that you could then use for one of these other things.
That's correct.
Okay. I don't understand the bus purchase. Every bus we got's underutilized, and I'm not sure I get that one at all. Yeah, somebody can help me with that one.
replace a bus that we're not fully utilizing now.
Exactly. Replace a bus we're not fully utilizing, I don't connect those dots, so that's something.
Yeah, they're high mileage with brand new seats.
Is that for a new route? I mean, if it's in, or is
No.
it to replace?
Just
a-
an aging
Just to
bus.
replace one of our older buses.
All right, so it looks like we can be in line with last year and maybe add, you know, the fire station or something and be not too far out of what we were last year. So we could be between 300,000 and 500,000 and take critical and a little bit of planning into consideration, right?
Correct.
I think that's fair unless y'all want to comment further on it.
I'd say just put 400,000 in the budget for
Okay.
it.
And I would say on the ball field, you're gonna have to have a completely separate discussion, because I've heard the outfield is the most critical problem there to satisfy the,
That's what that
Organization.
I've heard over the years,
I was
that that's been their
you know,
biggest
where the
gripe.
creek goes
Right.
underneath the outfield. That's, what was the estimate, 70, 80,000?
About 85,000.
Yeah, and now we got more than that. We got the field house. I'm assuming that's not the home team, that's the, across the way, that's the third base line.
And actually what they want to do is move the home team to the third base line and the visitor team over to the, what is considered the home field
Because the
now.
first base line is great. I mean, it's
Right.
fine. It's the third base line that they're
Correct.
talking about, okay. And so what else is in that 5.5 million? The whole field being turf?
It'd be the whole field. I mean, you're
Artificial.
talking new seating, you're talking a complete new you're basically talking completely remodeling the baseball field to make it more in line with what you would see, what Greenville has, their new stadium. And
To do anything like that, I would say you're going to have to get really creative with how to raise the funds, private, some kind of a
And
committee.
Mr. Luttrell and I have had that
Right,
conversation.
to raise the funds from private sources. You can go out on, you know, bonds and stuff, but I don't think that's a very smart idea. But if you're gonna do anything like that, then the organization, the baseball organization is gonna have to sign up for a long-term commitment. They're gonna have to sign like a 15 or 20-year commitment. I bet you they're not willing to do that. So you're gonna have to see what they're willing to sign up for, right, on a long-term commitment. And if they're only willing to sign up for, say, 5 to 7 years, and you're getting revenues out of that ballpark of X, right, and whatever your stream coming back to the city is, that's your ROI. You can only put money into what you're getting back to.
You'll never get this back.
That's why I'm asking the question. I
You'll
know
never.
that. You're never gonna get that back. So they would have to sign almost a 30 or 40-year long-term commitment, which I know they're not gonna do that.
I'd say
But to put any money into the ball field, it's gonna have to be, what's the revenues come back to the city, and the ROI's gotta make sense, right? It can't be a net zero, we don't get anything out of it, we're just outlaying money, so it's gotta be a win-win. So y'all need to find the win-win there, financially and otherwise. So,
Have you had conversations with either Dr. Perigin or Mr. Harper, the athletic director, about what the high school, you know, you see this list, looking at all these needs that Bristol Pirates have to make it a minor league, you know, for their quality. But I mean, what does the high school, some of these needs, you know, at the end of the day, it's a high school stadium first that they use for minor league baseball. So, you know, I think that may help prioritize some of these needs.
Based on discussions I've had with Dr. Perrigan, I think the outfield's probably the critical need, and that's for safety for not only the minor league players, but also the high school players.
Are we the only high school team using that field that's also used by the minor league team, though? When you look at Johnson City Cardinals and Kingsport and Elizabeth and then
I wouldn't be able, I know in Virginia, at least in Southwest Virginia, we are. As far as Northeast Tennessee, I wouldn't want to speculate as to whether or not the high school teams use those other fields.
Well, you could have Perrigan look into, you know, this whole creative financing. Is there something that could be looked at for the high school as a separate project? So,
Okay.
whether you
Who
do it
gets the revenue? We get a ticket tax.
We get the admissions tax.
And that's it.
That's, yes.
Now, who gets the admission fees? That's Virginia High.
Virginia High.
Handles that through the Booster Club.
Virginia High through the Booster Club, and then during the Pirates, I
So
believe they have.
presumably, they would know how much they
We
get
don't
each
get
year
it.
out of that thing.
We don't get an admission tax off of, we don't get
You
the
get it
admission
from-
tax from the high school.
No, you get it from the Pirates.
But yeah.
Pirates, yeah. So, I mean, that,
If we had all kinds of cash, it'd be a different discussion, but you still gotta be reasonable about any kind of project like that. You know,
Right.
$5.5 million is like a highbrow raiser, even if you had money, right?
Well, that's, I'm putting it in there because it's an item that we need to look at further and how we plan on moving forward with it.
Right.
Okay, so we'll move on to department requests at this time. Now, these department requests are over and above, and I will get my these are over and above what they have requested last year for these items. And the police department, overtime, they're requesting $24,000 in additional overtime. Last year, the city budgeted roughly with just straight overtime, we budgeted $76,000. That does not include grant and overtime that was designated for traffic. So total overtime budget last year, you're looking at roughly $210,000. Some of that's reimbursed by the state and through grants. So you're looking at roughly a $240,000 overtime item for the police department.
Okay, so let me back up. So this is just incremental above what last year's items were.
That's correct.
So that 24 is not what they're asking for. It's above and beyond the 210.
Over, that's correct.
Okay, that's just hard to follow when it's laid out that way. You should put the total, you know, in one column and then show that this is actually an incremental add. Okay. All right, so 24 is an addition. So everybody's asked for 1.3 million more than last year,
If,
all departments.
yes.
Well, that ain't gonna work. I hope they know that. That ain't gonna work. And I'm telling you what, right now, that is not the way department heads are supposed to execute on a budget. They're supposed to sharpen their pencil. They're supposed to look at it in hard detail. They're supposed to come back, and to come back at 1.3 million over what we are today, knowing the city's not good financial, does not play well with me, with their ability to look at this seriously. I'm just saying that. I would get skinned at the post if I came before my board of directors, knowing I was in financial extremis, and said I want 1.3 million more than last year. It's ridiculous. So I hate to start the meeting off like that, but department heads need to take note. That's not the way you manage this organization.
The only new line item on here is the animal shelter.
We committed to that.
Yeah, that's got to happen. But the rest of it,
Yeah.
well, the other big ticket item on there is obviously the 600,000 additional.
Yeah. for the jail.
Which was what we budgeted 6 before, right?
So this would take that budget to 1.2 million. So what you
Yeah.
have to do is back out of this 1.3, whoops, sorry, 1.3, you need to take out $740,000 out of that 1.3, that for total operating. Now the 600,000, that's our inmate housing. We know as of today, we're gonna have to be putting out an additional $400,000 to $600,000 over and above what we budgeted for 2017-18. So if we're going ahead and putting out $400,000 to $600,000 now, we might as well go ahead and budget for it next year and pretend like it's not there.
Well, Mr. City Manager, realistically, that's gonna require a vote of this council for that release of the 400,000. Am I wrong about that?
That's correct. You all will have to.
Okay, good. So I want to make sure. So what they're really saying is this year we spent, they said 600,000, and it ended up being at least $1 million, at least, if assuming the city gives it.
As of June 30th, 18, it'd be anywhere between $1 million and 1.2 million we'll spend on inmate housing.
And the way you've done this, make sure I'm right, you're adding 600,000 to what we spend this year?
That's correct.
So we're talking, we would be spending,
No, we're
No,
looking,
no, no. 600,000 in addition to what was budgeted for. So
1.2.
right.
So you're-
no. We've already
let's-
You're
budgeted.
bringing the
Well, let's start
budget
this
close
discussion
to
like we did the
actual
capital.
expenses.
What was the total expenditure
which is
last
1.2.
year?
Yeah.
What's the total
So this year
expenditure
it
this
was off,
year?
you're
And what's
trying
it
to get
projected
it
to be in
next year to
total?
be.
Total expenditure so far this year for
wanna make
inmate,
sure
ha-
that-
But
inmate
it's
housing.
1.2 million.
Either inmate or in total,
Well, let's, in
Because-
total, overtime, we've already at 100% in overtime with police and fire. So we're literally at 100 to 110% of what we budgeted for last year for police and fire. And that's why they're asking for additional overtime funds. Now, can that overtime, the fire department is roughly down, based on budgeted numbers, they're down roughly 6 firefighters at this point.
all right, so slow down. So the overtime for the police is 10% more than last year, roughly?
As of today.
And the fire, same thing, 10% more?
They're right at 100%, but
What does that mean? They're right at actual?
they're right at actual.
But if they ask for 30 more, they're gonna spend 10% more than the total this year?
That's correct.
All right, what else?
In regards to the E911 communications, that is an additional 40,000. They budgeted 40,000 this year. At this point, I don't think they're not on our target that they are going to expend that 40,000.
So that's 100% increase?
That's correct.
Can, one of the things like that E911, is that, and I guess, help, like, is that an ongoing expense, some of these things with the software and stuff, or, I mean, what are one-time expenses versus recurring expenses? Because if it's one
So-
time, that's a little different than if it's a recurring expense.
The E911's a recurring expense. In 15-16 and 16-17, the city budgeted actual amount 15-16 was 91,000 that was spent on E911, and for 16-17 we budgeted 96, and for 17-18 we budgeted 40. So that was a decrease. To be quite honest, I think it was decreased in order to just make the budget balance.
What are they
it had
spending?
to
What are
do
they
with the
spending?
agreement we had with Washington County when we joined our 911 communication, bought new equipment, new everything, and that was, I think those were projections rather than guesstimates
Well,
on our part.
I think the projection was probably wrong.
Yeah, that's obvious. Either that or somebody didn't give us the full information.
So
Well, that's one thing.
I know
we
you're
can't-
I know we're trying to work through this, but this is not being displayed correctly. Well, that's why you're getting all these questions, right? So the way you gotta show this is last year, in the last 2 years, here's what these departments spent. This year, they're asking for an additional amount of X, which is an X% increase or decrease over last year or two. And here's the justification of each item of why they're asking for that increase or decrease. And then we got the big picture, right? We're only seeing like one aspect of that, so we don't even know what they spent last year. If it's 10% up, so that really confuses the discussion. So we need to work on how we, how we display it, so it's really logical to follow. So if they got 40 more thousand this year that they're asking for, does that mean they're not gonna spend it this year? And if not, why'd they budget for it last year? It raises all those questions.
Well,
What's the 40,000 needed for? What's the justification?
From my analysis of the budget from last year, revenues were overstated and expenses were understated.
To
And it's that
balance the
simple.
budget, as you said.
It's that simple.
Okay, and that's probably gonna happen one way or another every year to some degree, right? You're never gonna
'Cause
get it perfect.
you're never going to get it perfect.
Right.
But you don't overstate and understate in order to balance the budget.
Okay, so to get away from that, it's what do you need the 40,000 for? What are you actually going to spend the money on?
Based on historical analysis, you're going to need $90,000. This 40,000 would allow for a budget item of 80,000 for E911.
And that's for staffing.
Yeah, that's correct.
90,000. So really, we need to put the other figures in, instead of just adding this up, we need to put the original figures and add 2. Is that what we're doing here?
That's
Well,
correct.
Yeah,
You're-
basically, this is all new money compared to what the budget is for the current year we're in.
Okay.
So the big items here, the 140 animal shelter, we know what that's for. That's to actually build an animal shelter, right?
That is for not only building that's your budget for the animal shelter from July 1 of 2018 through June 30, 2019.
Operating
That's
costs,
operating costs of the animal shelter.
all right? And the 142 for fuel reclassification, what's that for?
That is where, that's how we've classified fuel, and this will allow, we're going to move fuel from the departments back to fleet maintenance. Is that how we've done that?
Actually, this 142,560 is to make what was reported on the balance sheet reflective in our expenditure side. It will be offset largely, Mayor Mumpower and Council, by a piece of revenue of about $125,000. We have 5 outside agencies whose fuel flows through our expenditures that historically had only been captured on the balance sheet. In an effort to show expenditures have expenditures equal what we're paying out, this was to capture that, to get it off the balance sheet and onto our revenue expenditure budget.
In other words, the school system uses our fuel, the Bristol Life Saving Crew uses our fuel, and this is for that offset.
Why was it ever put on the balance sheet?
That's what we're correcting this year.
See the sign down here?
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, I like that.
All right, so what's actually, is this amount going to be in line with then in total, getting it off the balance sheet of what actually is being spent for fuel in total?
Yes, yes.
So that's,
Based on historical data that we have as of right now, we've not captured a year of historical data tracking it this way, but we feel like this is a good estimate.
so that's a must spend.
And
then.
and the 142 outlay is going to be offset by a revenue piece.
All right,
And I would like to say, I apologize if this is confusing. I think my intent with these numbers here was to look at additional requests, and certainly, as the city manager and I continue to develop the budget, our intent, and we will show the original budget, the amended budget, and those items. This was to just begin the discussion of what have the requests been, and what does council have the desire to fund?
And I'd like to reiterate, this is more information any council's ever seen prior to a budget presentation and in the history of City of Bristol.
no, that's fine, that's good. So always sort this top to bottom, biggest dollar to bottom too, so it's easier to see the big items. And 600K, is that more inmates we're projecting for next year that's going to go to the?
I mean, based on the number that we're going to spend this year, we might as well go ahead and budget 1.2 million for next year.
And I'd like to see, and I'd ask maybe Ms. Spradlin would probably be the person to do this. I'd like to really see a breakdown. I have seen all kinds of big numbers from the sheriff's department and so forth. So I see 2.7 million coming in. I see 2.4 million from local. I see 2.7 million from state, whatever it may be. And obviously those numbers are fluctuating. This year those numbers are going to fluctuate because if this council chooses to fund these transfers of inmates. But what I'd like to see is a complete breakdown, Ms. Spradlin, if we can. of that, most of the constitutional officers in general in the city of Bristol, Virginia. Specifically, I'd like to look at the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. I'd like to look at the Treasurer's Office. I would certainly like to look at the jail. I want a breakdown of what's spent, salaries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Benefits, how much we pay for benefits, and so forth and so on. How much, I want to actually.
Send the financial statement.
Well, I mean, I'd like to see it, be able to have it to take home and so forth and so on, and break it down, because honest to God, I don't know that those, I mean, I've been told different numbers, but 10, 20 different people. Everybody's got an opinion. We need to put the opinion out here so the public can actually see exactly what these departments get, and from whom, and how much we're actually paying for the benefits. And
Well, that's
so forth.
easy. We got the actuals. She's got to throw the actuals on.
Well, I want to put it out here and put it up here and pass it out to the public, so everybody's gonna know just exactly who's getting what.
So if I take that, go ahead.
And-
Audited financial statements on the webpage.
And our intent is in the budget workbook this year to include that department breakdown. So when council or anyone wants to look at a department and see what's the total expenditure,
It's there.
what revenue are we offsetting that with for the net, our intent is to have that in the budget workbook. But Mr. Flair, I'll be glad to
What I
provide that
want
to you
to
ahead
know
of time.
is, in essence, how much do the citizens of Bristol, Virginia actually pay for constitutional officers in particular? Because, you know, all I've ever heard is our salaries are picked up by the state. This is picked up by the state. I want to show exactly to the public at large, exactly how much a constitutional officer department gets from the city.
Yes, sir.
And that way you can balance the need and necessity of that organization and so forth, and how much they get vis-a-vis the benefit and the cost to the city.
So we need to have that total, current fiscal year, budget book here with all the account line item details that you flip through, that you got, and I know you have, and we need to be able to pop it up there quickly.
I
So we
want-
can go, you know, so we can go to that sheet and say, okay, there's the clerk of the court, there's the sheriff's department, blah, blah, as we're going through this, so we can be reminded of what we're spending, actuals, you know, how
I
it's
want to
running.
reiterate, we are looking, what I'm trying to do is get a consensus and get an idea of where this council wants to go on certain items. At this point, we've got to put the rest of the budget book together. These are things that we are seeing right now that we know are going to be issues when we start discussing the budget after April 10th.
I know, I get that, Randy. It's hard for us, and it's hard for me in particular to give you any kind of advice.
And
when I can't be reminded of how we're running right now. We don't have a frame of reference. That's why we're asking these questions. You know, if you say that we spent $1.2 million last year, and you're only asking for 12,000, well, so that's immaterial. But if we spent $1.2 million last year, we're asking for $1.2 million, that's a significant issue that we got to discuss why. So we're not clear on the frame of reference because we don't have it in front of us, and I don't memorize that stuff.
Only thing we'll need in the future, this is good, but just have a current budget.
Well, I mean, everything's in
We
the
can
current
look
budget.
back
I mean,
and
everything that we're talking about is already in the current budget, and all we gotta do, and I've got the budget here, and I'm looking at it from previous years, so.
And we've been told to bring our copy, we could
Yeah,
have done
that's all we're
that.
saying. That's what's causing these
Okay.
questions.
All right.
Now, let me ask this question though, Mr. Reeves, please. Bottom line is, when you want a consensus, I think we're all intelligent enough, I hope, to be able to go through these particular items and say we're either for this or we're not for this to a certain extent. You want a consensus from that point. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Well, we've already done that with some of it.
I mean,
Okay.
we know the animal shelter.
It's
That's
gonna have
a
to be.
given.
That's good.
Right.
We know $600,000 for inmate housing, that's dependent on a lot of different situations. What's it gonna cost for us to go to the regional jail? What will it cost for us to upgrade our current jail? What will it cost for us to build a new jail? What would it cost for us to build an addition to the jail? So, I mean, that number there, I'm telling council, right now, we might as well go ahead and budget for $1.2 million. We know that needs to be in our line item, and we can, if we decide to go with the regional jail, it comes back out of our line item, or a portion of that's going to cover the cost of the regional jail.
Well, and you agree too, Mr. City Manager, if we actually went to the regional jail, a lot of the cost that's going to state and city of Bristol, Virginia is going to be cut because we're not going to be spending as much for benefits, et cetera, et cetera. So the cost to the regional jail is actually less than what we think about. You have to have add-ins and so forth and so on. I mean, so.
I know you missed Thursday night, but I kind of gave a quick overview. I'll give it to you right now. As of today, it would cost the city roughly $3.1 million to go to the regional jail.
3.1.
That's correct, to go to the regional jail. Now, that's with 225 inmates. on this past Wednesday,
200 what?
225 inmates. This past Wednesday, I met with Commonwealth Attorney, the judge, probation office, Southwest Virginia Community Corrections, Sheriff's Office, and Chief Austin. I have stressed that we need to get the inmate numbers decreased. So 225 inmates at the regional jail is 3.1 million. You knock that number down to 115 inmates, you've dropped your budget to roughly $1.6 million. So depending on the number of inmates that you have at that regional jail determines the cost that you're paying that regional jail. Now, if we continue to grow the inmate at the current pace that we're growing inmates, which is roughly doubled in 10 years, so 10 years from now, we might as well consider that we will have close to a $5.5 million budget just to house inmates in the regional jail.
But it's also gonna be here, similar to, I mean, because we're gonna
That
have to be
depends on
shopping them
council.
out.
I mean, either every,
Even worse, cause we can't possibly handle that crowd here, so we've got to pay through the nose like we're doing now.
Like 2.5, 3 point something.
1.2 million we're gonna be paying this year for outside storage.
other communities are benefiting from us having inmates at other localities.
So there's some amount here that's gonna have to be budgeted for
There's-
inmate, care, right?
That's correct.
Whether it's here or whether it's at the regional jail. So I think I heard at the last meeting, we've got 240 inmates, X numbers here, X numbers, being pushed out to the other facilities, so 240. And I heard we were growing at 10% a year.
Roughly.
So this number here, 600,000 divided by $38 person per day is 42 people. Not 10%, it's almost 20% growth. So this is double what we were told the last meeting the growth looked like over the last few years. So what is it? We need to know the growth. What is it?
The 600,000 is what we're projecting for high end. What the sheriff's department says it's gonna cost us between now and the end of June is roughly a little over 400,000. I'd rather be on the conservative side and say we're gonna need more than what they're projecting.
I thought this 600, hang on, I thought this 600 was the incremental for next
Add-on.
year entirely for an entire year.
No,
That's
no.
add on to 600,
That-
$1 million we've already paid.
These here are what I consider significant budget requests over and above what was asked for in last year's budget. So last year, we budgeted 600,000 for inmate housing, specifically for the sheriff's department. Not only do we need to budget 600,000 that we budgeted for last year, but in addition, we need to add an additional 600,000.
So let me finish. So I took the 600,000, because that's an annual number.
Right.
Divided it by the 38 a day.
Right.
Which is 42 additional inmates, which
Right.
is twice what they said the growth rate was. So I'm saying their number doesn't jive with that. It should be 300,000, not 600, based on their growth rate. So what's the growth rate? Is it 10% growth a year that we have to send out, or 20%?
It's very, you can't, that's not how they charge you per inmate.
They charge you $38.46 a person per day, right?
But you have a rotation of inmates coming in and going out. So there is not you can't say that we've got 200 inmates today and next year we're going to have 220 inmates and the following year we'll have 242 inmates. That's not how they count that's not how the cost is counted for the inmate.
Well, I'm saying, yes, you can, but you gotta do it on an average basis. The ins and outs turn into an annual average. So last year, based on the ins and outs, we spent X, there was an average of inmate Y, you can divide it out. So what's the average doing year over year? It's growing at some rate.
We found out 15% is what we came up with.
I believe I understand the confusion here. We budgeted our expense last year for
Transferring inmates.
transferring inmates was $1 million, not 600.
No, it was 600.
No,
We
it
budgeted
was-
600.
The budget was 600.
But it's cost
The-
us.
the
But we
actual-
got
the-
$400,000
Yeah.
bill on the
That's
way.
right, that's right.
So the expenses exceeded 40%, over 40% of what was budgeted. So Randy is asking for the 600
Right.
increase to bring it to 1.2 million because we
That's what we
budgeted
spent this
6,
year.
we spent an additional 4, and he wants a 20% pad.
Yeah.
I think the
And that-
sheriff was using current figures, which were far exceeded our budget amount. That's why the percentage looks weird. When he presented that growth rate, he was counting what's happening right now. What's
'Cause-
happening right now is double what we anticipated.
Because the,
I
So
understand.
that cuts the
I get it.
percentage
I
from
get it.
20 to 10.
because the 1.2, you're trying to take this year's actual will be $1 million, we budgeted 6. We're projecting some increase at 1.2, which you think will keep us budget, is
Within
about where
budget.
we're gonna be, hopefully a little less than that, but it could still, because we
It
don't
could-
know what
we
the
don't know.
population is,
I mean-
but it
Up
won't
again.
be a 400, hopefully it won't be 400,000 additional, it'd just be maybe a little bit, but it maybe will come in a
So
little
400 to
less.
600 is.
We
gonna
don't know.
Take care of the gap he's seeing right now.
And-
That's correct.
So you really only got 200 incremental to that you're projecting could be the increase next year.
But we
Correct.
need to actually realize what the department costs. This is, we need, that's why I'm asking for everything, because I want the public to know exactly what we're getting. And I think we need to change the category, according to Mr. Hubbard, from professional services, which I don't believe that's appropriate, professional services, inmate housing. I think it probably needs to be transferred, like he said, is to storage, to storage. I think that Mr. Hubbard made that, and I think that's very profound and prophetic.
If I could just add one thing, the $1.2 million number for next year, which is the $600,000 increase, is based on 85 outside inmates at $36 an inmate for 365 days.
Whoa, okay, wait a minute, so that's 5 less than what we currently have, we had our last meeting, and not anticipating a 10 to 15% rise in population as we've been having
Right,
over
and
the
that's
last
the number,
course.
you see the number I'm trying to back into is.
This is
So
what,
that may not even be
Today,
right.
it's what is it projected to be next year, because we can't have another
Okay.
gap, and he's trying to put a little bit in there, so now it doesn't even look like that's enough.
if we keep on the trend, that's low, based on the 10 to 15%.
85 additional inmates at the current rate is gonna cost $1.16 million. That's why I have 600,000, that's an additional 900,000, I mean, that's an additional, $85,000 for inmate housing. What I'm giving to you all right now, at the bottom of page 20 begins the sheriff's budget, and really page 21 is the meat and potatoes of the sheriff's budget. If you look professional services, it's.
Hang on, is this something she's passing out?
Oh, I thought she'd already.
No,
Sorry.
hang on a second. till we get to-
We need to take
Organizing it right now.
Yeah, let's take 5 minutes.
Take 5, please.
All right, so if we'll look at, just for example, account 3142 on page 21, that is itemized as professional services inmate housing. As you can see in 15-16, nothing was budgeted, 16-17, nothing was budgeted, and 17-18, 600,000 was budgeted.
Hang on, slow down. I'm
We
on
didn't get
page
all of it.
21 now, we gotta get caught up with you.
We got the breakdown of departments, the sheriff.
That's what I'm
fire.
talking about.
Which account is it again?
3142.
3142,
It's
Not
on
on
page
here.
21,
gotcha,
about a third of the way down.
3142?
yep.
We're at 32 and 33.
And 3140 is what we actually spent, right, this year, is that what that line is? 781, 400?
This
Or-
is this year's budget, right?
Up here.
I'm talking about inmate housing at the moment.
I see
Page-
that. Where is this year's total for inmate housing?
This
You
is
got-
from the budget. As of right now, we are at 100%. We've spent the $600,000 that we have budgeted.
Okay, so in
this-
2015-16, we didn't spend anything.
Didn't
All
spend
right, you're
anything.
talking 3310 and then 3142.
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
What if, before, wouldn't that have been up in 3140? And you now working them back
Oh, I
down?
take it back, that's right, they did change that accounting, that's right. The previous, previously, they budgeted as professional services, 781,000 in 15-16, 400,000 in 16-17, and then they had added the additional line of inmate housing and took it,
Yeah, to break.
to
Now
600,000.
you
To
see
bring-
why I was asking the
yeah.
question.
Right.
I thought it was in 3140, so.
Sorry.
So they, 781 was spent, 400, we're gonna be above that, or we were above that 400, is that right?
So
16,
that was
17.
16-17. We're in 17-18. We budgeted 600,000. We're at 600,000. The sheriff will be coming and requesting an additional 400,000, maybe a few dollars more. It's my opinion that we need closer to 600,000 to be on the safe side. And so what you see in the gray column on your document is 600,000 for 17-18. The 600,000 that I have here on the screen, that number in the 18-19 budget will show $1.2 million.
Okay, so why don't we see actual, what was actually spent in 16 and 17?
That number had not been updated at the time of this,
Okay.
I can't believe
when the
we
budget
went
was
down.
completed.
Yeah.
And in the budget markup on April that Mr. Eads will present, you will see 16-17 final budget, 16-17 final expenditures, original 17-18 budget, adjusted 17-18 budget, department requested, and admin recommended.
Okay,
It's a
so
lot of
this year's
time.
actual is gonna be closer to $1 million, you're thinking?
That's right.
Probably over
Yeah.
$1 million, probably closer to 1.1.
And you're saying,
1.1.
do you think 1.2 is a good number, or do you think it really should be a little higher?
If, based on the conversation I had on Wednesday with all the individuals involved, if everyone makes the commitment like they've said that they're gonna make, I think we can do it with 1.2 million.
Okay.
Now, that doesn't take into account if we have a crime spree in the city and all of a sudden we have,
Yeah.
you know, an additional 80 people in jail that no one anticipated having.
So what are they gonna do different to mitigate the trend that's going like this?
Well, and that's what we talked about on Thursday evening. You know, my challenge to these folks was we need to go back through the jail roster, determine who could be let out pre-trial on some sort of home electronic monitoring, some sort of work program and treatment program, who is in custody that has already been sentenced, that has the ability, that's maybe not a violent offender, that could be released on some term of condition of probation that requires them to get a job, requires them to seek treatment at Highlands Community Services, requires all these things. And in addition to home electronic monitoring. So they may be released, but they're gonna be sitting at 1 Main Street from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And that's where they should be, and they shouldn't be
Okay,
anywhere
so
else.
without doing that, what would it be, another 200,000 or 300,000 above what you're asking for?
Not at this number. If it stays at the 225, then the 1.2 million would cover that would cover your inmate housing costs. Now, once it starts creeping up, you're going to need.
No, I'm saying without doing what you were talking about, which is additional things to keep the population cost down, right? If they don't do that,
If the crime rate remains constant compared to this year, then yeah, you're gonna get a bump.
Right, you may need an additional 100 to 150,000.
You think that? You believe that will be the number, realistically, if it stays like it is, or goes up to 10 to 15%, that just another 100,000 on top of the 1.2?
I don't know, if it goes up 10 or 15%, you're gonna be adding
You're gonna be-
significantly to it.
Yeah, you're going to significantly add to it.
Well, I tell you, I appreciate you showing me this, and I just looked at, you know, in 15, 16, it was $781,000 budgeted. Drops down $400,000 for inmate housing in 16, 17. And then, of course, last year, they changed the way they coded these things, and it shows that there was actually a reduction in inmate housing of $392,500. So to the casual observer who would look at this on the outside saying, wow, they're doing a pretty good job. I mean, it doesn't make sense with the statistics that were given us the other night that we've had a 10 or 15% increase in the population, that this could have ever gone down to went down to 400,000. So I'd like to-
That was what we were talking about, that the 781 used to include outside, prisoners.
Right.
Now, we shifted it out of that department, moved it down 2 levels to $600,000 professional service inmate housing. Before, it wasn't broken down in this detail, it was just saying professional service.
Right, but that's
That's the
what
old
we're doing
school.
now, but the budget amount for 16, 17 said 400,000. So, you know, I'd like to know, I mean, I'm just curious if we had overruns that year, because what I was told up here that time, Mr. Hubbard, you listened to the same thing I did, that we've been raising, the numbers have been going up 10, 15% for the last few years, so.
Well, it went from
That's what's
400, went from 400 to 600, because I would assume that would be based on what actually happened in the 15 or 16, 17 year where they budgeted 400,000.
But the way this budget, only thing I'm saying about that,
Yeah.
the way this budget shows, it looks like last year we actually save $392,000 to cut that, and that's not the facts. That's just change.
No, that's just an increase, decrease number. It's,
Actual that was spent for inmate housing in account 3142 and 1617 was $557,000
In
in 1617.
500 what?
557.
so there was an overrun that year
from
in the
4 to
budget.
5.
Well, something else by looking at the regional jail is the medical care. I mean, obviously 65,000 or whatever it is for
And
medical care.
we've expended that this year.
We've already expended that.
That's correct.
They come back and ask for more money.
That's part of that's why I'm asking for 600,000 instead of 400,000.
Okay, so here's the numbers I see. So the 781 at the cost of 14,000 per person, right, to house them outside the city jail, means in 15-16 there was about 56 people housed outside. In the next year, 16-17, you said it was 557,000. That's 40 people. So it actually went down from 56 to 40. So the 2-year average is 48 total on average. Now, we were told that the city jail can house 160 to 165.
I was told 150, I thought it was 150 and that was
And they're-
overcrowding by almost
Right.
twice.
So if it's 150, it's still a relative number. So then they're pushing 90 out because they said
That's right.
240.
They're pushing 90 out.
So the 240, so the 90 people that they can't house at 14,000 is $1.3 million. So that's lining up with what they're spending actually, right? Is the 90 people out?
It's not
1.2
counting
million.
medical either though. See, that's what.
Well, I'm just talking about the $36 per person per day, right? It's 14 grand a person, so that adds up to 1.3 million for 90 people.
Well, I'll tell you something else though. If we're asking now, if I understand, Mr. City Manager, we budgeted 65 for medical. That's why you're asking for 600 because they've actually overrun that and they're way shorted the budget amounts, way shorted. And I can tell you, which tells me that we have a lot of people that are in jail right now that aren't physically able and don't need to be in jail right now.
Something
Okay.
happened where it really jumped up.
Well,
Year to
no,
next.
look, you get somebody in with diabetes into the jail, and you say, God Almighty, your guidelines, you're going to go to jail for a year and a half. There ain't no ands, ifs, or buts. You're going to jail for a year and a half. And we're ponying up not just the cost of them being in jail, whether they're shipped out or not, we're ponying up for the medical care. Look at diabetes medicine, for instance, or different types of medicine, health care, broken bones, et cetera, et cetera. We've got people that are, you talk about disabled, they're disabled mentally and physically down here in this jail. They don't need to be here. I mean, that just blows me away that they should have come in here and said when they came in here and you presented this to us a month ago, somebody should have been enlightening enough to say, we're talking 600,000.
So based on what they said in the last meeting, that 10% growth, so they're looking maybe at 264 people, which if you add those numbers up, they're gonna need 1.6 million to house that additional amount of
Are you
people.
factoring in the medical?
Hang on, no, I'm
Okay.
not even factoring in the medical. So if we only budgeted 600,000 and they're looking at 1.6 million with a 10% growth, that's another $1 million
Right.
to cover it.
Yep.
Right? And then with medical, it'd even be more than that if there's
Yes.
a person or two in there. So that line item right there is going to get no approval until there's a serious look at the details behind these options.
You tell me something, Mr. City Manager. How in the world could they justify 65,000 only in medicals? Was that you weren't involved as city manager when this budget was presented or any of these budgets are presented? But what kind of information have you received on the average of health care costs, medical care costs for the city jail for the last 5 years? See, that would be the reasonable thing to do. I mean, you take the low and you take the high and you divide by 2.
And I think what has happened this year, they've had one inmate that had a significant medical issue that has gone above and beyond that 65,000. I think when you look at the historical data, anywhere between, really 65 is probably a fair number, but I don't think anyone's been taking into account the inmate population growth. So when you take into account the inmate population growth comes additional injuries, additional sicknesses, and that's why I think we need to increase that line item for that.
Is
With
that,
such small numbers, 1 or 2 really serious conditions, blow everything
Blow
out of the
everything out
water.
of the water.
So if you happen to arrest somebody who, within 2 weeks, needs a heart transplant, my God, goodbye, medical.
You put them out on, that's one that would probably qualify, I think, though, for some sort of probation status, even from our system here in Bristol. That's my opinion.
I've had it happen to clients when I've had a client that has a significant medical issue. The judge has actually called and said, you know, I've been advised that your client needs a significant surgery at UVA Medical Center. I'm releasing him on bond right now, and that way it's not a burden to the locality.
Well, you know, I was blessed and been fortunate to practice in front of some very fine judges. Judge Jones, Jim Jones, I had a client with cancer, and he knew he had 6 months to live or something like that. And Judge Jones, I was trying to figure it out because I was young practicing, and he said, we'll just continue this thing on the docket and so forth. And so on, he passed and was able to pass at his home with his family. But that's the kind of thing you get when you have some judges that have some more pragmatic and reasonable and have some compassion. And, you know, we need more of that instead of numbers.
Well,
These line items, I mean, we're looking at only at the expense side, but is that 100% for the locality for medical, or does the state
that's
pay?
locality.
I mean, does the state pay?
If they're in
any?
our custody, it's us.
It's all us, okay.
So when they're being stored off-site, are they responsible for their medical?
We
Or
are.
do they just send us the bill?
We get the bill.
Okay. So we don't even know if the other sites are even giving them safe
No,
conditions.
well, they have to give them, I mean, they're
Certain amount.
required to give them a certain amount of medical attention, but, you know, like for the regional jail, when we pay the regional jail, I'll have to double check. If we go to the regional jail, those medical expenses, the way I take it, are included in our rate because they've got that budgeted for in that daily rate, if that move is made.
Well, I mean, because that could be, definitely when you present all that, make sure, because that could have a significant impact.
I had a girl in regional jail, had a baby on Washington County where the regional jail's down and everything. Good treatment, by the way, too. So I like that regional jail concept. I think it's.
Well, anyway, for that line item right there, the sheriff needs to give to you a very detailed analysis. Last 3 years, we had 40 people, 56, 42, cost us this. Jail only can house 150. We're at 90 out. That's where the million's coming from. We expect this growth to be X%. Here's what we're projecting for next year. Here's the options we got. So all those options you mentioned, like, you know, not being in jail, but being like on homeless, monitoring,
Ankle
cost
monitoring.
X. So the cheapest option is this one right here. That's what we need to see.
That's what you're going to
And
do.
we'll have to have a what is it, a leap of faith to make sure, because we've been promised all these things. I mean, before I was on council, the promises we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. Well, you know, we come up with all these wonderful ideas, like I asked you. You know, we're gonna do this before the budget, so we'll budget this anyway. But you know, we're gonna make it better. And you know what? Once the budget's done, you know, I think we've been sucked in. You know, we've had lifeblood sucked out of us by this new $600,000. I don't know where we're going to get it.
Due to that big jump from one year to the next, what I would like to see, did we maintain our 150 people during that time period, or did we start pulling those out to send them out elsewhere?
Good point.
Okay.
Right
Say-
before
say
the
that
other
again.
words,
Say that again.
Are we at?
We normally keep 150, which is overstocked, but that's still 150. I'm a businessman, not a lawyer. Did they take some of that 150 and start farming them out?
before they start doing the.
Well, I mean, you know, because it went from 40 to 90.
Yeah, right at the right
That
time.
would have meant, did we have a crime wave, or did they start pulling them out of the 150
Yeah,
and send
right.
them off?
So you want to see what was the jail actually housing?
What was the jail population?
And what was
Right.
the jail population, and what was being sent out?
Right.
Yeah, 2 line items.
Okay, I'm gonna, based on the discussions we've had, I will come back with more detail on these items, but I can tell you on these items here, the Commissioner of Revenue is asking for $9,000 for a ProVal real estate billing system. The treasurer has, some tax sale fees of $13,500.
What is that?
IT, I'll tell you, I don't want you to blame Mr. Belcher on the timekeeping software. That is my push. The city needs a timekeeping software. It is a it's the employer's responsibility to keep the employee's time. It is not the employee's responsibility to keep up with their time.
Is that an ankle bracelet that they wear? while
It's an
they're
ankle
here?
bracelet. They have to come in, check in. So that timekeeping software is extremely important for this city, and it will save us potential thousands of dollars in potential litigation costs in the future if we're not careful, because all it will take is one instance where there is an employee who says, I haven't been paid for my overtime, I've worked X number of hours of overtime, and that number there is a small price to pay to ensure that employees' time is tracked.
Or you have to have those records whether you're overpaying or underpaying.
Right.
It's all a matter of,
It's
we don't
it's
want
for
to
everybody's
guess
benefit.
what's really happening.
It's for
right?
everyone's benefit. It keeps track of individuals' vacation time, sick time. We know when someone's been out on vacation. We can analyze, are they taking vacation days on a Friday before a 3-day weekend? Are they taking sick time? Whatever that situation is, with a click of a button, we can see those numbers, and right now, it's not quite that easy, to say the least.
It saves a lot of admin costs and a lot of time.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Good.
timekeeping.
Yeah, and I think I've mentioned this before, but I would assume those software, I don't know if it's, you buy the software, it's a one-time expense, or you're buying a licensing fee.
You're buying a licensing fee, and it's roughly going to cost the city $20,000 a year for that licensing fee.
Because that, I mean, I think that kind of have some sense of, you know, if you do this, then you're committing yourself to,
Correct.
you know, it's 27 this year, but then the next 3 years is
Yeah,
also.
but with that, the
commitment.
way businesses justify that is the staffing expense you're already incurring. So if you're having a person have to keep up with that manually,
We're keeping it up with it
then that
manually now.
staffing has to be looked at.
And this feed into your payment system?
And it would work with our payment system.
Right.
It smooths lines things for HR, and it smooths lines things for
Yeah,
finance.
no,
You avoid,
You're done,
An extra
right now, you're
level
doing
of
triple
error
the work
making.
for one item, and this way you can actually do the item one time.
Yeah.
Okay,
and
what
it's
about the
done.
police mobile data terminals? That's a big-
Those are critical needs. A grant has been applied for. That's basically the computers within their cars.
How much will the grant pay for?
The grant was 55,000.
So 116 minus 55 would be the net request, or is that already netted out?
I'm requesting 116 in case we don't get the grant, because this is an item that needs to be,
are
dealt
the
with.
ones they have now not working?
They have significant issues with the ones they have now. They're old. I mean, they're maybe 5, 6, 7 years old, some of the computers. And it's, and those computers, they take a beating. I mean, they stay in the car 12 hours a day. It's just hard on them. I know, Mr. Belcher has found some computers that are more specifically designed for, hard use, such as police use or military type use, which would be more in line, because the computers we have right now are basically a beefed up business type computer.
Okay, and the 61,000 for the mobile dock?
That is a critical need as well, and that is what basically keeps the computers running.
Is that a replacement? It's more than last year. They're failing more, or what's the deal?
I just know there's an issue with it. They're not working correctly. It's not allowing the computers to work correctly.
Okay.
Of course, your animal shelter, we've talked about fuel reclassification,
What,
contract labor, I'm sorry.
what's the emergency services backup? Just, I mean, is that the back?
911,
Is, you know, 'cause-
Where are you talking about?
right in the technology, the last item,
Yeah.
emergency service backup.
Because I know in
Switching equipment.
previous years, there was talk about, you know, data and being able to back things up and stuff like that. And, you know, some of this,
Sounds like 911.
yeah,
where
I
you
don't
can
know, yeah,
Switch
it could
over
be
to the
very,
county, or they can switch into us.
I don't know
That-
what,
They had
that's-
before.
What this is for, Mr. Belcher is requesting this so that our servers are backed up, so that when one goes down, we have the ability to continue to operate.
so it's a redundancy built.
Correct.
Just a server.
We've talked about the animal shelter, fuel reclassification, contract labor for fleet maintenance. Basically, that's when we send a vehicle out to get repaired that we cannot repair in-house. Economic development, that line item is $36,000, and that is for advertising on billboards up and down Interstate 81.
So where's the overtime being spent that is required to have more this year than last year? Is the overtime because of,
I'm sorry.
is the overtime being driven because of staff gaps that haven't been filled, or is it because there's a higher requirement on police and fire to go do something?
A lot of it has to do with the lack of staffing.
So would this be a duplicate inside the staffing model then? If you actually staff that person that's gap, that would go away?
It may not go 100% away, but it would significantly reduce it. There's always going to be overtime. That's just the nature of the beast.
Would it reduce this increase, or would it reduce?
It would probably get rid of the increase, and then it would potentially reduce what we've budgeted for in previous years.
I think the chief had mentioned overtime because we wanted to start monitoring the interstate.
What do you need? Oh,
But we budgeted for that. There's a specific line item for that.
And the revenues for that?
We got revenue I know we
It
had to
has a
report
source
it one
of
time.
revenue to pay for that overtime.
There is a source of revenue for that. I can tell you, on average, you're looking, anytime an officer has a court date, that officer has generated anywhere between $5,000 and $7,000 in fines. I think what you've been handed, because at this point we're through with the department request, you've been handed the financial summary for.
well, before you get onto that, just to wrap up on this one,
Okay.
we need to see, like you were going through, what's critical, the justifications of each, right? And some of these, like advertising, some others that you're saying maybe aren't critical. You kind of prioritize it, put the big dollars at the top that are really critical, why we need it, and then the others at the bottom. And
I'll send you an updated list prioritizing those needs.
okay.
All right, I have a comment too. The overtime is, the vast majority of it is between fire and police, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and what is driving this overtime is the vacant positions.
That's correct.
Okay, now, has anyone taken the cost of the vacant positions and then the offset of what we did not spend on the positions, and then take away the overtime to see where we're at there?
Did we save money or not?
Did we save
Gotta
money,
have-
or did we spend more money because of
can-
overtime?
You can do that to a degree, but you can't always anticipate overtime. So even if you were fully staffed, you wouldn't necessarily be able to say there would be no overtime if you were fully staffed.
Well, yeah, you can. You just got to say actual,
But
from the last year before, and this
you
year.
can do that, but what I'm saying is when you're projecting it, if we have a major incident in the city that requires all hands on deck, we can't project.
There's always variables.
There's always variables.
But
So
There's always,
what
we
he's
can
saying-
look at actuals, and what you can do is you can see, well, let's take the fire department budget.
Well, what Kevin's saying is we made a conscious decision last year to freeze hiring. We said no more hiring. We're going to freeze where we are.
Knowing.
Gap positions, knowing what we were doing. We're going to gap it until we understand where we are.
and
we
knowing
did that
we're
on
gonna have
purpose.
some overtime.
And so we're wanting to know now, that decision we made, was it a good decision? Was the amount of staffing, were we able to cover the critical needs of the city? How much did we spend when we made that decision? Overtime was spent, but what's the net of that? So was that decision we made last year good, bad, or indifferent? Because we made some different decisions last year. We want to do a metric take on our decision. That's why we're
Just
asking
for the
that
sake of
question.
argument, the two overtimes represents basically one person per department. If you'd had one more person in each one of those departments, would that overtime pretty well disappeared? Possibly. But
Mr. Eads, we're in the,
I still think the overtime's cheaper than the having a person.
With
Well,
these
some
numbers
departments,
here,
we
I'm
might have cut
convinced
three
it
people.
is
Some
too.
departments, we might have gapped 3 people, which is
Yeah.
$180,000. If we only spent another 30, we netted out
Yeah,
$160
yep.
grand. So that's what we want to know. And if we had bad decision we made, we're willing to back up and say, okay, that was a bad decision. We need to do something different. That's why we need to see that number, right?
And we're in the process of closing February, and once we've closed February, within the next week, we'll be able to get that out to all of you all and let you know where we are 8 months into the fiscal year.
Okay, good. All right, keep going, sorry.
All right, so do we want to move on to the solid waste? Because I anticipate we spent 2 hours on this, and I would anticipate potentially 2 hours or longer on solid waste.
I just want to mention before Ms. Marnie got here, we voted that Tennessee should beat Kentucky in the regional. Yep.
No, I was gonna say, we actually changed Wallace's roundabout tasking. We're putting it right on Piedmont, right in front of her house. That's where we're gonna put the roundabout.
And council, just to let you know, the information that Mr. Hubbard passed down the line is the January final financial statement information.
Yep.
In the 17-18 appropriated budget amount, that is the amended budget. So it's not the 17-18 original budget that we referenced earlier regarding the capital fund. It is, it includes any amendments we've made to the budget that council has approved since then. So I just wanted to make sure that.
And these are totally, they're not, this isn't the breakdown, this is just the top line in essence of each department, expense and revenue wise, but the actual financial statement will have the breakdown. Similar to what you got those two sheets for the fire and,
So that's 7 months worth of
yeah,
actual data, basically.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
seven, all right, seven. We're gonna have 8 here shortly.
All right, so as you're looking at that financial summary, you'll see about halfway down, you've got the revenues for solid waste and expenses. To the far right column tells you the actual percentage that has been spent as of January 31. And without further ado, we will discuss the solid waste disposal fund. As you all know, the solid waste disposal fund is an enterprise fund. And here is the definition of an enterprise fund. It is a fund established by a governmental entity to account for operations of an enterprise activity. Enterprise funds are segregated as to purpose and use from other funds and accounts of the governmental entity with the intent that revenues generated by the enterprise activity and deposited to the enterprise fund will be devoted principally to funding all operations of the enterprise activity, including payment of debt service on securities issued to finance such activity. In some cases, the governmental entity may be permitted to use funds in an enterprise fund for other purposes and to use other funds to pay costs otherwise payable from the enterprise fund. So that's where we are in regards to the enterprise fund, and that's what the solid waste disposal fund was. It was set up as an enterprise fund, which basically means it needs to pay for itself. Here's the overall cost of the landfill to the city. There is an outstanding debt of $33,767,350. There is also a transfer or a write-off from the general fund of $22 million that could not be paid back according to the APA, and they advise the city to write that off. We have a net position of negative $17.6 million right now. At this point, the landfill has cost the city $73.3 million.
Good.
All right, so stop right there. So the net position, the 17.6 million is still a future obligation.
Yes.
So we got 17.6 million that we gotta obligate ourselves to pay, okay?
Plus you have the outstanding debt we have to pay.
Can I summarize just one thing? The negative $17 million net position, Mayor Mumpower, is after we've borrowed $33 million and after they've had $22 million from the general fund. It is actually the ending fund balance after all that
So that's a balance
activity.
sheet figure.
Yeah, so that's a multi-year number, right?
Yes.
So what's that on an annual basis?
It varies. Before the $22 million transfer, the net position at June 30th was $37 million. So it varies based on the annual activity. But I can.
Our debt expenses are basically 1.9 million, right?
Toward the 33.
So that goes toward the 33.7, right? Line item that called debt expenses here we see.
Yeah.
Basically $2 million. That's an easy number, right? 2 million is what going out each year to pay for the 33. But in addition to that, we're having to transfer an additional what, annually? About $1 million, right?
Roughly.
We've been, yeah, they average it was around $2 million a year for the longest time. Then the last 4 years, it dropped to $1 million, $1.5 million, and then it's been under $1 million.
Is that the other financing sources? Is that where that shows up on this?
That's the 22 million.
No, the.
Oh, you mean where it shows up? You see that?
General fund transfers that's showing up under the other financing sources here?
If you look at that little teeny number under expenses, the 100,646, which is the subtraction of expense from income, that's how much we're gonna have to pull out of the general fund at this point.
Yeah, but the general fund
Make it
transfer
whole.
should come in on the revenue line, right? Because you're transferring
It
from the
will.
general fund, so where does it show up on, under revenues?
The general transfer is under other revenue.
Under other revenue?
Yes, under the
So we
revenues.
transferred 730, 861, and 886. So that's been going up, but we've only done 224 year to date, right? So
Well,
that's projecting a lot lower than
That's
previous
got more than
years.
just the transfer from the general fund in it, doesn't it?
Not
Doesn't
that-
it have recycling income and all that?
Not the other revenue, no.
The only other item in that 224 is interest income. So, the transfers at the end of January were 222,583. And then there was a little bit of interest income on top of that.
Okay, so that's a good news item actually, because we're looking at only 380,000 of transfer this year versus 800 in previous years, right?
No,
Is that, how am I missing that?
because the items for the expenses have not come in, they have not been put
I'm
on the books.
talking about on the revenue line.
That's what I'm
If you're
talking
having
about
to
as well.
transfer less in, so you're saying there's enough left between now and the next 5 months, it's gonna go back to 800.
Because a large piece of that 886 is the 240 for the liner that last year council decided we would add on top of the transfer.
Which we haven't paid yet.
Right, and it won't be paid till the end of the year.
All right.
It won't be paid until we know for sure there's cash sitting in the solid waste
Okay.
fund to cover it. I mean, I'm sorry, I said that backwards. It won't be paid until year end. It'll be the final transfer if funds are
From
available.
accounts.
That would still only put you at 680 transfer, so that's still less than 886.
And if you'll look, Mayor Mumpower, that's a $100,000 negative for the year.
That's
So
7
really,
months.
you would add that 100 on top of that as well to break even.
I've already done the 7 months to project it for a total of 12, so I'm projecting, I'm dividing it by 7, multiplying by 12 to project the total.
It'll be around 8 again.
It'll be right at 86.
Okay.
Yeah, we wrote off that 22 million last year,
The year before.
year before.
So is that 17.6 staying stable? It's not getting paid down at all? It's just sitting there year after year?
Yes.
That's a, balance sheet number, it's not our.
Okay, so our ending net position on June 30th of 2017 was 17.6 million, which I've already made reference to. The audit findings. This has been an audit finding since 2007. Proprietary funds are required to maintain a positive net position. The Solid Waste Disposal Fund has a fund deficit which resulted from costs of providing services, including capital costs exceeding the fees and charges collected. The Solid Waste Disposal Fund has received continuous advances and transfers from the general fund to subsidize its activity. The cause of condition, rates charged are not sufficient to cover costs. And I want to stress this has been a finding every year since 2007 in our audits.
Hello, well, boy, isn't that a,
So,
what is that? Tell us, state the obvious.
The only thing that they've done differently since then is we started raising the collection fee.
Well, that's what we gotta
Which-
talk about. That's
That's
the crux.
kind of paying for itself.
That's the
but
crux of the discussion, the commercial, the fees going into the
The
landfill.
disposal fee is where we're getting killed because we're not getting any charges for those walls that cost $1 million.
but this is a
Every 2.5
breakdown. This is
years.
a breakdown of the Solid Waste Disposal Fund debt. As you can
Okay.
see, we've got GO bonds 33.7 million, unamortized premium that's dealing with a bond issue of roughly 391,000, capital lease of 312,000, Landfill closure liability, that liability is gonna stick with us, for the life of the landfill. It's $6.6 million. Our net pension liability is $1.6 million. Compensated absences, roughly $124,000, which our summary of the debt for the landfill is $42.8 million.
So you take that number and subtract our assets to come up with the 17 million in the hole?
Yes.
Is that correct?
For the most part.
Mr. Eads, can I ask just one thing? This figure of debt here from the landfill, it doesn't even count 108 million that the city also owes.
No, it's
whatever.
included,
It is included.
yes.
He means the general fund debt. No, it's separate.
Oh, that's right, general fund debt's 108.
But includes the 33 in the 108.
No, it's all separate, this is solid waste debt.
That's what I thought. So it's 108, and plus this debt.
Correct, which should be funding itself, and it's not.
Well, some of those general obligation bonds that are for the
No.
solid waste landfill are in the 108.
No.
Because that's what
They have to
the
be.
analysis we had. They have to be. They were in there.
We
as
borrow
well.
that money, they're gonna not
Yes,
let
they
us get
absolutely
that.
were.
They weren't.
They absolutely were.
They weren't.
I saw them.
Poor-
They're in
Wait
there.
just a second. I can
I'm
give
not saying all
you
of
the
them are.
total of the bond.
Not all.
There's a bunch of solid waste fund obligation
There is
bonds in our geo debt.
That's
It's absolutely a
correct.
true statement.
That is true.
Is it then? Is she gonna let me know?
She's got the breakdown.
I didn't see it.
I remember 30 or 40 million.
Yeah, see, that subject has been
I asked that question.
not been cleared up
No.
for a year and a half. We need to know.
Well, that's done.
Yeah, it's serious. It's really kind of serious because if it is included, and I don't know how you can write off 22 million from the general fund.
Well, this is one of those, if you give me the money today, I'll pay you back Tuesday.
Well, I don't know in 16, you know, if the public audit from the Commonwealth wrote off $22 million because they're never gonna get paid back. And however much, and we're gonna find out in just a minute, I don't know how we were able to borrow $6 million last year and with our points and limits and so forth. And this is gonna get to the heart of the matter, and then how was the Falls project? If this is included in the 108, if all of it's included, that's one thing. If it isn't included, there's a problem.
Yeah, I
There's
don't
a big
see how
problem.
it couldn't be.
That's what the audit said. The audit, people came in here with the audit said, waste fund is a whole different issue. And we got it on video, so it's
Debt
going.
deposits, no.
At June 30th, 2017, general fund debt, general obligation bonds of 24.7 million, some unamortized premium, bond anticipation notes, which we just refinanced, 47.5 million. And then there's other debts, some literary loan, capital lease, net OPEB obligation, the net pension liability. That totals 105 million of general obligation, general fund debt. It's not all general obligation bond debt. So, I think that's where it may be a little confusing.
I don't understand what
But
you're saying.
then, the solid waste debt, the bond debt is the 33.7 million.
And it's separate from that 105?
Yes, sir. The 105 includes non-bonded debt though. So the total general fund, if you're just looking at bonded debt, general fund debt is 24.7 plus the 47.5.
Which is 71 million.
And then you add that to that.
Well, but they've added that to come up with the 108.
I wanna know.
In other
I think
words,
that's right.
Yes,
our
sir.
I think it's-
ability to borrow money on general obligation bonds is right now at 108, is that correct?
That's correct.
And,
All right.
and in that 108 is also the revenue sharing
Yes.
agreement with Washington County
Right.
of 2.1. But that's not bonded debt.
Well, if you go back to the analysis that they did before we refinanced, and you look at all those bonds that added up to the millions, the solid waste bonds were in there.
I
And
don't,
they were-
yeah, I mean, forget the terminology, whether they call it, whatever the debt is, you're saying our total debt, that amount we can borrow, right now is at 108, so we can't go past, what, 111?
113.
Yeah, 13. So of that 108 bonded debt, what are they counting in that figure? I
She
don't
said
wanna know any
24
other debt, I don't want no leases, I don't want no Washington County, I wanna know what debt that the state says your bonded debt cannot exceed this amount of money.
And I'd like to know that too. I mean, that's really where the issue
So
is. You said
is
100.
that 33 in that 108 or not?
Yes, sir, it
It's
is.
because it's
It
it's a
It
bonded
is. Then
debt.
that's a different answer than I just got.
Well, that's
3
because
minutes
we
ago.
didn't ask the question correctly. We asked about debt instead of
So
bonded
the
debt.
24.7 million was what again? That was,
There's all kinds of
That was
debt.
general obligation bonds in the general fund.
We have lease
and the
contract
47 and a
debt.
half.
Was the bond anticipation notes for the falls that we refinanced.
Well, when you borrow against
That's
everything,
$2 million got allocated.
when you borrow, you still have to borrow against total debt, indebtedness of the city. The city can't take on debt that's, you know, and not be counted against how much you can borrow for your geo bonds and so forth and so on. They can't violate state law. But you're saying the 105 million is including this, and that's all we owe. So where do we get 108 million?
It's
Where's that
roughly
figure
100,
rank?
it's roughly 108 million, because I don't know if
And I'm sorry, and I'll be glad to ask Amy to go make a copy of these 2 pages if you want to look at it from the CAFR. But, and I apologize if I'm not stating this clearly. Total debt of the general fund, total long-term debt of the general fund
We
at
don't
June.
want that.
You don't want that.
We want
I'm sorry, I
total
thought you
bonded
wanted
debt.
that.
let her explain it. You'll probably get the
Okay.
answer. Just take a deep breath, let her explain it, then we'll.
Total long-term debt of the general fund at June 30th, 2017 was $105 million. Of that, it included the 24.7 and the 47.5 bonded debt that we're talking about.
Which is the falls.
Right, and when you-
24.7 is general obligation bonds, multiple different bonds. 47.5 is for the falls, so that's 72.2 in total.
And then the revenue sharing agreement with Washington County is 2.1. That all goes toward, per bond council, our legal debt limit.
Does
which
that count IDA, what IDA took on?
IDA does not go toward our legal debt limit, but it does, those numbers are not included in here, Mr. Fleener. They're in addition to these numbers.
So
But
that's
IDA is what the city of Bristol, Virginia, you know, owes, right?
6 million of
Is
that.
that only $6 million? Can you tell me
Right.
how much it is from IDA?
I think our,
33 something.
33 million in
That
bonds?
was, but that was a revenue bond, not a general obligation bond, meaning the people who bought those bonds are taking a gamble that they're gonna get paid back. Of the 33 million, the city's obligated to pay 6 million of it only.
and then of this solid waste debt fund summary up here is right from our CAFR last year. So of that 42 million, 33.7 of that goes toward our legal debt limit.
Right, so
Mr.
then
Manager, may I
again,
have a copy of the audit that was given to us at
So-
the end, in January? Can I don't have it with me. Can somebody get me a copy of that? please?
Absolutely. Do you want my copy, Mr.
I'll
Fleener?
do- Yeah, it'd be easier. Yes, ma'am.
If you had the 24 and 47 and 33, you get 106.
and you add the 2, you're at the 108.
Yeah.
So, as
That's
far
what
as
I'm trying to
solid
say.
waste, I mean,
Solid waste is in that number of
yeah,
108.
the 33,000,
I was
that
told it
is
was,
part
and I was
of our
showed
bonded
the
debt.
paperwork was.
Yeah, but that's
The
not our
other,
total debt.
no, but the other expenses here are liabilities, but they show up, really, I mean, like the landfill liability,
number. I
pension,
know it's in
they're really liabilities, not debts.
there.
This is
Well,
what shows up in the debt.
24.7 plus 47.5
Yeah.
plus the 2 million plus the 33 is 108 million. That's what makes up the 108. So the solid waste is in the 108 million number.
That's the only way they're gonna get that, is through GO
What's
bonds.
not in that number is what's on the IDA's coffer. That's what's not on our balance sheet as an obligation.
And it needs to be
It
there.
needs to be.
The 6
That's the
million,
only thing missing that's not on the balance sheet
It actually,
obligation.
like, you're funneling it out here so you don't show up here.
6 million only that needs to be shown. If it isn't, the rest is not our obligation. If it craps out, they lose.
Whatever the obligation at the end of the day, if the house of cards falls, needs to be on the city's balance sheet. That's what
$6
we're all
million
saying here.
Minus
I think
whatever
everybody's
balance.
saying worst case scenario, everything falls apart. What's the city on the
No,
hook
I'm
for?
saying that's the way you
Yeah.
do accounting.
You have to do it
You
that
have to
way.
put the accounting obligation on the balance sheet. If, at the end of the day, if it doesn't pan out, you're obligated to pay that.
Right.
It's gotta go on your balance sheet.
So once the IDA is pulled over, it's gonna go to an uptick.
It'll go to 141 million.
That's what I thought.
No,
No, it'll actually, because we're
$6
not
million
liable
more
for
is
the
all.
whole thing. There's a
Look,
$6 million
here's-
we're liable for.
That's right, it's only the
It's only what
legal
we're liable.
obligation.
legal liability. Now, if you don't pay that additional 33 million, the city will never be granted another bond in the future.
That's
I understand that, that's the repercussion.
That's right.
Repercussions.
well,
That's
another
right, but that's
revenue.
different than
That's
your
not-
actual
It's different, it's
obligation.
different than the actual obligation.
Yes.
But
Right.
it's, to me, a moral obligation is an obligation.
I understand that.
Revenue
respect that.
bond's not a moral obligation.
And if we would have been outside
6
of our,
million is.
if we would have been
Right.
outside of our legal obligated debt limit, Moody's and Standard & Poor's would not have upgraded our financial grade. They would
Right.
not have done that. They look at this all day long. They understand this. So we went through this multiple times. We're actually within our obligation, but we can't borrow any more money.
We're maxed out.
We're done. We're maxed out, period.
Yeah, you throw the 6 million in there, we're really,
We're
whether
maxed out.
we're legally maxed out or not, we're financially maxed out.
Our obligation's not 6, it's a portion of that, but once you add
Mr.
that up,
Flainer?
Yeah.
we're maxed out.
We paid off some of it.
We're maxed out.
Mr. Fleener, the information that you were requesting starts on page 49 for the general fund, and it is on page 52 for solid waste. And council, there are other
Does
copies.
anybody else want a copy of this?
I can get it off financial statement.
All right, so this is the transfers to the solid waste fund over the past 4 years. You can see in 17-18, we've projected 886, 16-17, 785, 408, 15-16, 445, 652, 14-15, 986, 243. So over the past 4 years, we've transferred $3.1 million to the solid waste disposal fund. 4-year average is $775,000. However, you need to remember in 2016, there was a $22 million write-off per the Auditor of Public Accounts because it was deemed uncollectible.
Why can't they just write off, why can't we call them up and say, why don't you just write off this whole debt we've got on the dump? I mean, if they're willing to give up 22 million, they should just basically.
That's, what the city did was when they gave money to the solid waste folks, they put a thing on their books, on their assets, saying accounts receivable from the solid waste fund or the landfill. So each year they gave money, they put that, they have to have a double entry system. When you write a check to somebody, you have to put it in an accounting column. So they were asset accounts receivable for all that time since beginning of time.
Sound like check kiting to me. I mean,
Well,
realistically, I mean,
It was a way of everybody, I guess, at the time they started, they hoped that someday it would turn around and start making a profit, therefore could then legally pay back the city for its advances.
I wish I could do that way.
I know it.
mean,
So
that'd be great.
the auditors realized that finally and said, forget it, you're never getting it back, just take it off your books. One department owes another department, and the case being in this, it's never gonna be able to pay it back in our lifetime, so why have it? Just take it away.
Can you at least go to them and say, hey, you're owed public office?
Nobody was out the money other than our taxpayers who had to constantly,
So the bottom line here on the solid waste is what are you gonna propose different on the expense side or the revenue side to get
Alright.
this thing more going toward break even?
This is the current breakdown of the revenue and expenses for solid waste. This is for this year. So you can see the disposal operating revenue is 3.1, the collection operating revenue is 1.5, non-operating revenue is $886,000 from the general fund, and then there was some indebtedness proceeds of $150,000. Our expenses, personnel and disposal, $863,000, operating expenses, $1.78 million, collection personnel, $586,000, refuse operating expenses, $359,000. I may have those numbers backwards. No, I don't. And then debt service expenses, a little over $2 million, and other expenses, $242,000. So it's $5.8 million, $5.87 million to operate the landfill.
Those were the original budget figures.
Those are the original budget figures. So,
Okay, so back up a second. So you're bringing in 3.3 million for disposal operating revenues, and you're trying to cover 860,000 plus 1.8 million, so you're trying to cover 3.6, right? But you're only bringing in 3.3. So you're 300,000 in the hole because you're not covering your disposal costs. It's the first thing that shows up, right? So what are we gonna do to cover our disposal costs?
you're gonna have to increase rates.
All right, so if we increase rates, how much would you have to increase it to close the gap totally, or close the gap by 30% or 50%? When we
Well,
start closing the gap?
I'll get there.
Okay, you'll get there. We'll go back, just trying to get my mind around it. All right, collection is 1.5 million, and your collection is 586,000. Is that your only expense?
Well, operating expenses that they're using the equipment to,
How much of that,
Collecting
you
trucks.
talking about disposal operating is part of collection operating too?
No,
collections are trucks that go around the city. They have to be maintained, they gotta be fueled, and you pay your personnel.
refuse, you might as well interchange that with collection operating expenses. Refuse and collection are the same thing.
Okay, so if you add those together, then you're basically $1 million.
We're basically barely
Covered your
covered.
expenses is what you're showing.
One thing I would be interested to see, because when I look at this, is if you add up the revenues, I mean, it's more than the expenses. I think it's the debt service. And how do you allocate that between collections and disposal? I mean, in terms of, how's it, you know, how can, basically, how's the landfill, where's the most of the trash come from? Does
Should
it come from the
allocate based on
collection
tonnage.
side? Yeah, I mean, but I think if you could, because I mean, when you add up collection personnel and collection operating expenses, it's less than the revenue, but then it's that debt service. Is that being allocated between those two?
It is not, it is reported separately, other than, it's reported as a separate item.
But I mean, for internal purposes, could we see?
To really, absolutely, but to really know where it belongs, I think I would have to go back and look, where did the $37 million of debt come from? My feeling is, I don't know this to be true, but my feeling is it didn't come from the collection side, because most of our collection equipment has historically been capital leases. My feeling is, really to allocate it, if you want a true allocation, I'd have to go back and look at the source of that debt. And I'll be glad to do that if I can find the historical documents.
Well, that's one thing, you know, you look at what the reason the debt was incurred, right? But the debt was incurred. And the bottom line now is disposal and collection uses the same asset. So they're moving trash in there. So if there's 10% of the trash is for collection, you allocate 10% of that debt
Yeah.
service to collection. If 90% is moving the tonnage for the disposal, 90% of that gets to the disposal side. Then you see how they both compare, right? That's what you do.
I think, I mean.
Because they're all sharing the equipment.
To
They're all
see
sharing the
both, to
landfill.
see historically where it came from, but also the current operations, I don't know that I've ever seen that.
Do we know that? How much?
Basically, we've never tried
It's
to
never-
cover the expense of those liners,
We
which is
gotta have
where
a
your
feel
$2
for how much
million
tonnage
debt
is
service
moving
is.
for disposal.
I've got, okay.
We have a solution in the future, but it doesn't help us.
For the current year, or for last year, the city placed 7,098 tons of waste into the landfill.
7,000
That's-
tons,
7,000 tons. That's city residents, city businesses.
okay?
Now, that number will increase, not significantly, but we need to include grass, leaves, tires, that sort of thing. It's an increase, but not one that would be what I would consider significant at this point. Outside agencies, outside localities brought to the city roughly 144,000 tons of refuse to the landfill.
144,000 tons.
Correct,
Versus 7,000 coming in for collection,
correct.
okay?
So basically, 7.98 is the city's contribution
Yes,
to the landfill, and the 144 is everybody else.
that's correct.
Okay.
So it's basically 151, so 7 divided by 151. So 5% of that's collection and 95% of that's disposal. So
Yes.
you would take 2 million, you put 1.9 million of that debt service to disposal, and you'd put the 100,000 to collection, which makes disposal even worse than what we're seeing. So the problem comes back to the same thing. What are we gonna do to increase the fees and disposal to cover the total expenditures that it's incurring?
So let me give you all a brief summary of outside contracts that we have where either companies, waste management, we actually lost a waste management contract, but other companies and localities are bringing refuse into the city. Our contracts that have been negotiated are based on market rates with competing landfills. And the market rates with competing landfills are anywhere from about $14 a ton up to about $22 a ton, depending on what they're bringing into the landfills. So our contracts represent those prices. Most of our contracts start at roughly $16 per ton, and it increases in incrementally per year, usually over the course of 5 years. So depending on when our contract expires with certain localities, depends on where we are in negotiating those contracts. Currently, we're in negotiations with another locality. Their contract expires on September the 30th of 2018. I've been advised that unless we lower our costs, they will probably go somewhere else. So there's a catch-22 when you lose a contract with the landfill. One, you lose the revenue, but two, you gain the space that they were taking up. So then you've got to find so if you lose that revenue, that's going to put a higher burden on other entities that are using that landfill, because we've got to recover that cost in order to continue to operate. If we don't cover that cost, that means it's going to be a greater general fund transfer in order to cover the cost. So it's a catch-22 that we're in. I can also tell you that other landfills, they will FOIA our contracts. So they know exactly what we have been paying, or what we have contracted with other localities. So they can go in and potentially beat us on the contracts. I can tell you that a lot of people continue to come to our landfill simply because they like the services that we provide and the ease of access and the ability that their trucks do not get stuck in the landfill like they do in other landfills. So there are good things going on that allow people to come back and maybe pay a little bit more than what they would pay somewhere else, because it costs them more to go to other landfills when they have tires that get busted based on the fact of driving over trash, and the access may not be quite as easy. Now, with that being said,
So they're already paying more today, so $16 you said per ton versus 14.
it depends. Now, you've got to take that in context. That does not mean that there's other localities that are, or other landfills that are charging a straight $14 per ton. It depends on what's being brought to that landfill. In general, the low end on contracts that we see is about $14 per ton at other landfills, all the way up to $22 to maybe even $25, depending on what they're bringing into that landfill. However, I would say the average that you're seeing at other landfills is somewhere between the $16 and $19 range per ton for trash.
Just regular.
You know,
everyday trash.
Washington County taking their convenience stations to another landfill, they're probably paying roughly $16 to $19 per ton. Now, I can tell you Washington County budgets at $660,000 a year to service 57,000 residents for their refuse collection. They don't have a landfill, and that's why they can budget $660,000.
Yeah, you take away our $2 million debt
Nor
service,
the-
which is primarily the landfill.
They don't have pickup either, though.
They don't have pickup
Yeah,
either.
So it's just to maintain the
Just to
collection
maintain
stations.
the convenience stations, and then they take it to whatever landfill they're contracted with. So with that being said, here's a snapshot of what we are projecting for the fiscal year 19 budget. We're projecting $3.59 million in disposal revenue, $1.47 in collection revenue. Non-operating revenue, I've left, that is blank at the moment, for a total expense of roughly $5.06 million. You can see that that number is less in revenue than what we projected last year, which was roughly 5.8. Disposal expenses for this upcoming year is $3.1 million. Collection expenses, $841,000. Non-operating expenses is might as well say $2.3 million, for total expenses of $6.28 million. What's that mean? We have a budget shortfall of $1.214 million. Now, the question is, how do we cover $1.214 million? You've got an option to raise your real estate taxes 10 cents, maybe 11 cents. That would cover that. Or You take that deficit, divide it by the number of paying customers that we have that's collecting that is paying for our trash service, which is roughly 7,100. Divide that by 12 months. It equates to about a $14.69 increase, but a $15 per month rate increase would make up for the deficit.
Okay, go back. I'm confused. So you're saying 5.1 million total revenues for the solid waste?
Yes,
So we were 7.6 million in the 2016-17 actual. This year would be projected on a 12-month basis around the 7 million number roughly. So where's the other 2 million going?
I think that was debt. That was debt for the liner that was issued, $2 million.
I'm looking just at the revenue line.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the way they used to do the budget. They would take the line and count it as revenue, and then take it out as an expense, and it just screwed everything up.
But we're
So-
still projecting even this year, which we have 300,000 in there, we're still projecting on a 12-month basis that 4.1 million showing right now year to date on the revenue total, right? Would project to 7 million for 12 months, because that's only a 7-month number.
Mr. City Manager, is it possible to get the 5 people that got us involved in this to City Council and let them figure out, divide it by the $14 and
I
make
see
them
what you're saying.
pay the whole thing? Because getting us in this in the first place, the 2007, 6, 8 councilmen that have got an albatross around this city's neck.
And that does need to be further
Everything.
explained.
I mean, this is just ridiculous. I mean, if we raise the rates, if we raise the pickup fees
12 months.
by almost $15, and we're actually penalizing the senior citizens
Here's
in
your
this town,
percentages.
in my opinion, is at the expense of younger people because they don't have that much trash. So, I mean, does that make sense?
yes, and yes, but there is an exception for elderly residents in regards to rates.
There is?
Yes.
Okay. And I don't have any problem with that.
Hey, I'm old.
Yeah, so you get an exception. So,
So you see, so that's a different discussion. You see where I'm a miss?
All right, I was distracted,
I
so
know, he
where,
does that a lot, but that's okay.
yeah, I need to go read it here.
He needs to go to the little boy's room, so.
Please.
I took 4.1 million through 7 months. I divided by 7, I multiplied by 12, I got 7 million.
right,
So I'm seeing that actual this year would end around 7 million, not 5 million. That's where's the 2 million I'm missing?
In the 4.1 million, Mayor Mumpower, 1.19 of that is debt. It's the debt. That bottom revenue number is debt that was left over from what was issued in a previous fiscal year. We didn't get the liner paid for. And so that is debt. You can look there, the budget was 701,630. And the difference in that is $400,000 of debt money that hasn't been spent down that is still sitting in a restricted cash account. So I would tell you, if you want to divide by 7
So
and
it's
multiply
the transfer in that was typically higher in prior years, it's not gonna be as high this year, that would pull that down from the 7 million I calculated to more like 5, that's what you're saying.
right.
Yes.
I'm saying if you annualize it, if you divide by 7 and multiply by 12, before you do that, of the 4.1, you have to back out the 1.192.
Okay.
Square root of the difference. Multiply it times your age and the day of the month.
So that's 5.1 million.
right.
Okay, so that's your 5.1. All right, and then, so you're basically taking debt service out of your number then?
That's
too?
correct.
Okay, so that's what was confusing.
Okay,
All right, so now you're gonna cover that with your expenses there. You're seeing expenses of 6.2.
correct,
So we're $1.2 million in the hole,
that's correct.
okay?
Can
And
I add one
explain
thing
that
about those
million
expenses?
two,
Okay.
Oh,
because
could
that's
I-
capital projects and.
There's roughly, in addition to the roughly $890,000 shortfall that we would have, there is an additional request of roughly $300,000 for some capital items that we need to pay for in the landfill, okay? And that's why we're getting the 1.2. One of those items is a new, I think it's the, is it the leaf, which truck is it? Yeah, automated trash truck, which is roughly $265,000.
You hadn't figured any waste tech impact on this at all?
Well, we're gonna get the waste tech, all right?
All right, so that is how much for a truck?
265,000.
And what else?
I'll let you all can explain the other needs that were budgeted.
See, that should have been broke out in here for capital projects to get this line item back up to the 2.2.
You're 890,000 short without any capital things that we need to consider, okay?
Can I expand, Mr. Eads, on the 2.2 I think Mr. Wingard was asking about?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. That includes the $240,000 liner payment that we decided last year to put in. And the rest of that is the $2 million worth of debt service that is attributable to the solid waste disposal fund. And that is the number prior to refinance that was bookmarked to solid waste. The actual debt service will be a little bit lower than the $2 million, but we have to keep that in there to meet the upcoming 2021 big payment. That was the plan, was to keep it level. So that's what's in the 2.2 million.
And that's what's never really been covered. We're actually covering a portion of it, obviously, or we'd come up 2 million in the hole instead of 1.2. So we're covering some of that, but not all of it.
Okay, so last year for the physical, 16, 17, we spent 6 million on the expenditure side, correct?
Yes.
And then for 17, 18, we're projecting 6.4.
That's
And
correct.
that's with a liner in it.
That's correct.
And now for the 19 budget you proposed is at 6.3.
Correct.
And you're saying there's a liner in that?
No, there's the $240,000. Last year, council made the decision to, rather than wait until it was time to buy a liner and have to do it all at once, to include $240 a year.
Absolutely.
Toward that. So in that 2.2 million includes the $240,000 set aside, if you want to call it, for the liner.
And what's the other 2 million?
Debt.
Just total debt?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
So you can't really do anything with the 2.3 million then?
Correct.
So it looks like to me the only way forward on the solid waste is what can you do to raise the revenue line by, if we said we want to try to get this thing to break even in 3 years to put us in a better position when the other debt starts to come, can we find a way to get 300,000 of the top line revenue up by fees or the way we bring certain types of disposal in?
$15 would cover it all, right?
$15 would cover it all.
All right, so if you
I'm
divide
saying
that into four
$2,
chunks.
can you let me finish?
Yes,
and
sir.
then he can talk.
All right, sounds good.
So right now you said $16 a ton. At 144,000 tons, if you raise it $2 a ton, that gets you about 300K.
Here's the problem
Right.
with that. We can't because we're already in contracts for extended contracts and those rates are already set. So contracts are typically set on a 3 and 5 year rotation. So I'm stuck with the rates, the commercial rates,
Okay.
until that contract expires. The majority of our contracts don't expire until roughly 2020 or 2021. There
so
are
then
some
it's-
that expire in 2019.
So then it comes down to what other types of disposal can you bring in there to get a permit for that you could charge enough for to make some more money?
Which
What
would
other-
require DEQ approval, and our landfill is a unique situation because of.
Yeah, I get it, but this
you
is
know,
a problem that's gotta be addressed, I get it. So
And-
that, you gotta look at that, what's DEQ gonna require? What other disposal types of hazardous waste could be put in there that they would approve? How much revenue could we, otherwise we're sitting here and it's gonna be the same picture year after year, and this picture's $1 million picture that we have got to get rid of. Or do we just shut the thing down and do what Washington County does? And send it to another landfill and just be done with it?
Well, the problem is shutting it
still
down,
got
then
the
you're just
debt.
stuck with a $2.3 million debt payment.
Right, so is that a better cost number, right?
We're
than-
paying 1.2 right now. If we had it in place, we'd be paying 2.3. So we're paying more by shutting it down.
But is it,
But if what you save, you know, if you could do what Washington County does and you're not incurring those expenses, so you're able to cut your
I see what
expenses in
you're saying.
half, right?
Okay.
By doing what they're doing, maybe you save enough to net that out and it's a better overall number.
Well, there's also a closing expense that goes along with closing a landfill
I
that's.
get it, the total analysis of closing it, because you would incur a closal fee from DEQ, right, blah, blah. But
And-
that analysis has to be done, just
Well-
like the jail analysis, that analysis has to be done for
And
this.
that analysis, we have asked the APA for a portion of the funds, because based on our scoring with the APA, we are, can request up to $500,000 from the legislature to help us cover some of these expenses. We've actually got a call with the APA on Tuesday to discuss, because what I've asked to use those funds for is a financial forecast for the city, to have that professionally done. And I've also asked for a professional analysis of the landfill and what are the true costs associated with the landfill and how can we move forward. Because we've got to get an expert in there that can come in and say, this is exactly how it would work if you close it. This is what's going to happen if you continue to operate it. We have our own projections. We need a professional that can come in and analyze that to the degree that gives us a certain percent of certainty so that we can move forward.
Okay,
I
so
can tell you, based on conversations I've had with Draper Aiden, roundabout numbers, I can tell you all these roundabout numbers and get it, you know, within some certain degree of certainty. But until we have a true analysis of what it's going to cost to close the landfill, what it would cost us to have additional types of waste brought into that landfill that we don't already accept. I mean, there's costs associated with all of that. And that's what I'm asking the APA to help fund a study for the landfill.
Okay, that's fine. So the other way you could do it, you could consider doing some RFPs and say, this council's serious about selling this landfill. And go out on the private market and do some RFPs and let them come in under confidentiality and do the analysis with you to see what it's worth and how they would see it operate and to understand what, you know, can it ever break even? If you get zero interest,
I'd rather talk about that.
I get it.
There's another matter, and I can talk about that not in public.
Right. But I'm saying, from a business standpoint and from an expense standpoint, all those options have to be looked at.
And we're doing that as we speak. It's just, I can't get a true analysis. I'm not a landfill expert. I don't think there's anyone in this city that's a landfill expert.
I'm only good at making trash. I don't know how you get rid of it.
So
Yeah, we
This-
understand that.
this
None
is-
of us
this is
are
where
either.
we're at.
None of us are either, right? But we do know there are private companies that are operating landfills. And those private companies, if you go look, they are not in this predicament, right? So they are making money. So there's a formula out there, there's a business model out there of how to do that. We've got to figure out what that business model is, right? Maybe it's, we're bringing the wrong type of trash in. Maybe it's, we got too many people and equipment moving what we got. I don't know. Maybe it's the design of the landfill. But there is a formula to make money. Otherwise, those companies would go bankrupt
Well,
and already be bankrupt.
I mean, I think what you've got to remember, we have $2 million in debt. That a lot of these companies,
Forget it. That's not what I'm saying. It's an enterprise fund, right? It's a standalone business entity.
right.
There's
And
a
what I'm
formula
saying
to make
is
it break
other
even.
landfills may not have the debt associated with it because they went in with with cash, prepared the landfill, did everything that they needed to do for the landfill, and it didn't operate with debt from the get-go.
Yeah, but when you analyze that business model, you take that debt and set it aside. You look at day-to-day operating P&L, right, of if you didn't have the debt or if you had the debt, what's it look like? You may get the answer, oh, you can operate it better than we are to help pay the debt down. Or you may find out it's a lose-lose, right?
Right.
In other words, we spent so much debt with the property we bought to do it, and they didn't. They went and got a nice little mound of dirt and started moving it off, and they only put $500,000 in theirs, and we end up throwing 5 times that, right? But you got to do the analysis to know that, right?
Right, and I mean, based on the numbers I know, we can't cut any more people, we can't cut any more expenses. I mean, we are operating bare bones at that landfill at this point. And the only other way, that, as this council knows, the only way to fix it is increase revenue, and how do you do it?
Well, I'm
Or
sitting here saying,
decrease
I don't
cost.
agree with that statement. Maybe
Yeah,
you're
I don't
right.
either.
I don't agree with that statement. Maybe you're right though, but until the analysis is done, you can't make any declarations of do this or do that. It's like option A, option B, look at the numbers, follow the numbers,
And
right? That's all I'm saying.
when you, I want to go to Mr. Hubbard's point in regards to Waste Tech. I've been made aware of some information that I would not anticipate, and they're supposed to come talk to us. At least what I've been told, I would not expect anything right now with Waste Tech in fiscal year 19. And evidently there's been a hiccup
Would
somewhere.
fiscal year 20 be a full year or a part year?
That they're going to come and talk to us about. So,
Okay.
Just the typical smooth sailing that we get into.
calm waters. So,
We're gonna take another
We
break.
can't send out for a carton of water that something
done with
happening on the way back. and
No, we're not
it
done with
Fell
this.
off the truck.
I've got several comments we're going to have to pick up after lunch.
so right now, I'm done with my presentation. I can answer any questions.
All right, so we got other
Okay.
questions on the solid waste then. Take a break now or ask them after we come back?
Okay, we'll take a break.
We're gonna eat, take a break and eat now, or what we gonna do?
Well, I mean, it's, this was what was on the agenda today. I've already covered everything that was on the agenda. So if I can answer the questions, then we can break for the day.
Okay, so we're breaking for the day when we break.
Right.
Okay. Then
We're
let's-
just gonna
let's
take a
answer
break?
some more questions.
All right, so let's just work through it then.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
All right, go ahead and ask. Ask away, Mr. Winkler.
All right, well, this landfill's been a thorn in my side from day one.
Everybody's side.
And we've already had admission that the average on the contracts is somewhere between $14 to $22 a ton. And we're paying a can rate currently right now at $18 a month, which we've had increases over that for the last, not too long ago, it was implemented.
That was toward cutting the deficit down.
And now we're getting into some capital projects and different things, which we gotta add the liner. That's a no-brainer. That liner has got to be a line item that going forward, no questions asked about it. But here lies the problem. Somewhere, somehow, private is able to operate these landfills and make a profit. Currently, as it stands right now today, when I cross those scales with debris from my tear outs, I'm paying a tonnage rate of $35 a ton, and I pay it every time I cross those scales. Whereas these commercial contracts can bring in debris from all over the region, North Carolina, Kentucky, West Virginia, Georgia, wherever they're coming from, at a rate of $14 to $22 a ton. But the locals are paying $35 a ton to cross those scales. I've always had a problem with that. And now we're talking about the only option is to raise the can rate once again for the 7,000 residents that live here, and this rate increase will not affect commercial rate whatsoever because they're locked in under contract. So it is the true taxpayer and person that lives in the city that's going to offset this at an additional $15, which is going to take the can rate monthly to $33 a month, which I would dare say if you search the whole entire nation, you won't find a can rate that high. So there has got to be another option. This is not the answer. We're going to have to put everything back on the table on that landfill. I'm not convinced that we are operating it to the optimum potential. The last time I was up there, we had 2 D8 dozers going within 60 foot of each other, and that land mass up there in that quarry is not big enough to justify 2 D8s operating. I'm sorry, that's my opinion. Do we need to have another piece of equipment sitting on the sideline in case the D8 does go down so that we can keep operations going throughout the day? Absolutely. But we're overspending on the operational side of maintaining that landfill. I'm convinced of that, though I'm not an expert in operating a landfill by no stretch of the imagination, but there is always another way to do business. And there's always a way to save a little bit more money and squeeze a little bit tighter. This thing is out of control. It's been out of control since day one. Nobody has ever been able to get their head wrapped around this. But if private can do it and make a profit, government should be able to do it and break even with the same rates. We're not in business to make a profit, but it's nothing wrong with offering a service and breaking even.
I agree with that.
So there is another method, and we have to figure it out. And this rate increase on the can would be a complete disaster in this city. So there's got to be another option.
He did say two options. He said, if I understood, you gave two options, Mr. Eads. One was a 10 to 11 cents per hundred tax increase on every citizen in the city of Bristol, Virginia, which would actually probably be about equal to the can increase and so forth, trash can increase. So we have two options right now to balance the budget with the landfill, if I'm understanding again. I mean, to make it a little concise, either a 10 or 11%. This is not counting any other parts of the budget. This is just for the landfill part.
That's correct.
Okay. Then 10, 11 cents per hundred, or $14 to $15 per consumer can.
Right.
Or we can do option 3, which Mr. Mumpower alluded to, is potentially close it down and say, we'll figure out a way to cut this debt and so forth and so on. I mean, those are really three options.
Well, I guess there's a fourth option, sell the landfill.
There's actually a fourth, there's a couple more options.
I mean,
Oh, there's always options.
there's always options. You know, the question is, you're always going to have, if you sell the landfill, you're always going to have an expense associated with that, because I seriously doubt
You have a 30-year monitoring
right and
obligation.
And I don't know, but based on my conversations with DEQ, I don't know if another company would take up that liability to monitor. We're going to have to, if we close it, we're going to have to monitor it. And then even if we sell it, there may be a monitoring piece in that contract that the buyer says, you all need to cover the cost of that monitoring that landfill.
I forgot about that.
And
RFP.
so there, I mean, when this is a big project to undertake. I mean, it's an extremely large project to undertake. Mr. Wingard, I completely understand exactly what you're saying. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you. I was tasked with coming up with a solution to make this break even. And this is the short-term solution to make it break even. Now, there's long-term solutions that we can potentially look at. In regards to operating a D8 dozer, I'll just put it bluntly, the expense associated with that D8 dozer is minuscule as compared to what the overall budget of the landfill is. That is not going to make or break the landfill. The question is, we've got to increase revenue or decrease expenses. We know right now we cannot decrease $2.3 million of expenses. That's a debt, and that's associated with the liner. That's not going to decrease. And the only other thing that we can do is decrease employees. And that decrease employees is not going to cover the cost of what it's going to, that would cover the difference between the operating and for the revenue and expenses.
It's actually something else you can do. So you got to do a price inflection analysis. What if you went down and you were $9 a ton? Would you quadruple your customers coming in? Maybe that triples your revenue. If you're the less than $10 provider, maybe you reach out and you're surprised on how many people would use the landfill.
Yeah, but you blow that landfill life expectancy up pretty quick.
Exactly.
Well,
You got to do the
there
analysis, though. That's a top line analysis that you got to do,
Oh,
right?
I know. Oh,
I mean,
I know.
I don't have a problem with that, but once you start putting more trash in the landfill, one, your landfill life expectancy decreases, and two, your liner expense
I get
decreases.
that.
I know.
I'm saying is you got to
I'm not
analyze it
disagreeing
from
with it.
every single angle.
I'm not disagreeing with that. I agree with you 100%. But you've got, when you take everything into account, what's that final number for each option, and what's going to be the best for the city? And that's, that's why I'm asking the APA to help fund this study so that it can be done appropriately.
yeah, I think that's the best next step, since
Yeah.
we're really not in a
But at the
position
same
to-
time, that is not going to solve our problem for the fiscal year 18-19 budget. We've got a $1.2 million shortfall. So how do we solve it in the short term?
You want to hear some other ideas, since we're throwing out ideas, Mr. Mayor and everyone else? We have the entire city budget to play with. I mean, in essence, I mean, you know, there's going to be things that I've even heard already that could be cut that are needless and eat into this debt to the landfill until hopefully our white knight comes in and so forth with his shining armor and so forth and so on and bails us out. But I think that there are a lot of what's the word? Help me here. When you waste, a lot of waste. How's that?
Yeah.
A lot of waste
A lot of waste.
on this budget. That, I mean, in departments in this city. And I'm not just talking about the regular departments, fire department and police department. I don't think they can be cut too much more. But I'm talking about everything, every office we have in this city, we need to look at it. If we can save $50,000 from this office, we'll save $50,000. That goes, $50,000 don't sound like a lot, but by gosh, you put enough 50s together, we can pay into this debt and leave the politics out of it for a change. And
So what he's saying is, I think of it like this, there's the must-haves and there's the
not going to happen.
like to haves, right?
Yeah.
And that's how
Things you don't must.
that's
things
how
you
we've
don't
broken
really-
it down.
Yeah, but let's just talk out loud for a second, right? So from a budgetary standpoint of where the city is, the must-haves, what are the must-haves? What's the real mission of the city? Well, the must-haves are public safety. Right? You have got to fund public safety to the level of making sure the police department, the fire, and the things the city's tasked to do that no other entity can do. You got to figure out, you fund those first and to what levels to make sure you've done that properly, right? Sorry, Parks and Rec is not a must-have.
Nope.
It's a like-to-have. That goes down to the like-to-have category. If I have enough money left over, then let me look at my like-to-haves and see how much I actually have that I can put toward the like-to-haves. So Parks and Rec is not a like-to-have. I mean, it's not a must-have. So Parks and Rec is on the radar screen, right? We're spending a lot of money for programs in Parks and Recreation. Everybody likes to go, and I understand it. Everybody likes to go to the park for the little dog thing and the midget football. I understand that, and you have to provide some of that community service. But we're down into the must-have and like-to-haves, right? And we've got to look at it that way this budget cycle, because we're facing 36 months of debt service that's going to increase. And this year, we have to put a line in the sand on what's the must-haves and what's the like-to-haves. And the like-to-haves are going to get some serious discussion, right? About whether we fund them at the 30% less than they've been funded, 40% less than they've been funded, 50% less than they've been funded, right? So your job as city manager is to clearly identify the must-haves, public safety, fire, public works, all that stuff that we have to have, and what is the revenues and the expenses line up to make sure we cover that. And then that pot of money that's left over from taxes, we say, out of these others that are not must-haves, what are we willing to fund?
well, and
At
I
what
think,
level?
and saying along with that, Mr. Mumpire, Mr. Mayor, sir, the city manager also optimistically, you have to tell people, you have to tell us what it's going to cost us if we keep the like-to-have. Okay? In other words, everybody wants to have and has been used to and so forth and so on. When you've had, well, I won't put the past, but in the past have just been rubber stamped. Whatever they want, they get. How much is it going to cost the people to keep it, the like-to-haves? And I can tell you in this budget already, looking at some of the things, there's some, you left out a third category, Mr. Mayor, not in no way in green earth, and we need to peruse every department in this city. You can peruse it. I know you can. I know we have a very capable CFO in this city now. Thank God. Thank God. But you need to peruse it. I'm talking about constitutional officers. There is money there to be had. And we need to do it. And then we need to come in here and tell the people, this is, what do you need this for? Go down here to the courthouse sometimes. I challenge you. And see the people, they're walking over themselves to find something to do.
Yep, that's gonna be looked at. CFOs, I mean, I would love to be in that chair actually, right now, 'Cause I'd love for you to be there. I would look at that
I'm not
budget.
firing her.
I'm not saying, I'm just kind of talking out loud so she
But
hears
wait.
it. I would love to be in that chair, because I would be looking at the entire budget, right? And I would go, if I was king of the hill, and I could say what I was gonna fund, I would go down there and I'd start checking them. Yep, definitely gonna fund that one, that's part of the city's mission. And I'd add those numbers up, and I'd go, that's really all I gotta have. And you're gonna find out it's gonna be way less than what we fund.
Well-
And then I'm gonna go back, and I'm gonna start yellow and redlining the things that maybe we do, maybe we don't. The yellow stuff is kind of okay, iffy, and the red stuff is like, this is absolutely out of bounds on what a city should ever be doing. So that money, and then I would look at that analysis and see what it told me. And I bet you'd be surprised what number you come up with when you do that.
Was
You
the
know-
APA gonna help us in that area as well?
That's part of the financial planning aspect. Now, I will say, and I've told, I think every one of you all this before, my theory on local government is you provide for the health, safety, and welfare of the general public.
That's it.
That's it.
And that's the purpose of local government. And I fully believe that, and I'm committed to that.
Not to get Joe Bob, his family member, a job or whatever, make sure they get paid and funded so they can have a job, et cetera, et cetera. That's what we've been doing here for too long too, so you're stopping that.
I mean, I'm committed, I mean, that's the general mission of any local government. I'm committed to that. And I completely agree with the mayor's comments. You've got to say what's the critical need, which is your safety, public safety, your streets. And beyond that, I think everything's on the table when it comes to, I mean, and I've told you all this before, I've said it in public, I'll say it again. We're building a city from the foundation up. And where do we have to go to in order to start building that
That'd actually be a
foundation?
good way to show this total breakdown by
Yes, sir.
account, is you highlight in a different color the ones that are critical to the city. And the others you say that aren't critical, that are the like to haves or shouldn't need, you highlight them in the color that says, this is the stuff that's up for discussion, right? That's the way you should actually do it.
Can you all, is that asking too much of you all
No,
to do that?
I'll categorize each department as to whether or not it would be considered a necessary function, or whether it's a like-to-have function, or whether it's a no function at all for the city.
Because realistically, Mr. City Manager, you know, Mr. Wingard's been on this, and Mr. Mumpire's alluded to it today, but if we don't do it now, in 2020, 21, it's gonna do it for us. And we're gonna be, I mean, really.
Yeah, we're gonna have a self-correction
So somebody
we
can
don't
come in,
want.
yeah, somebody can come in here and they can, you know, promise the world and the moon. But realistically, what we do now, in a large extent, determines whether or not this city is alive and well in 2020, 2021. If we don't do the tough things now, what I proposed when we first got on council was bankruptcy or whatever, but you can't be bankruptcy, but we may end up, if we don't do this now, we're gonna get that later. So it's pay me now or pay me later, and that's how I see it, so, you know.
And I'm
it's tough.
determined to make sure he's wrong, and
And absolutely.
we're never gonna get there. We're irresponsible if we ever get close to that. Cause there's an answer here, but we gotta be tough now to get to that answer, and then we don't have to worry about it. And we all know what the topics are. We're talking about one of them today. Golf course is another one. Sheriff's Department's another one. We got some big ones, and we gotta start making the tough decisions now, or they'll be made for us. That's what'll happen. I'm not gonna let it sit here and say it's gonna be made for us, that this ain't gonna happen.
Good morning. Good morning.
All right.
And we gotta look at the whole big picture, the whole entire city. The landfill's a big issue, but the bottom line is we gotta take our trash somewhere. We gotta deal with our trash. So, police, fire, rescue, and trash are all critical.
And that's why what I said earlier was, the department heads need to be looking at it the way we're talking.
Yes.
We don't need to be saying it this way. The department heads need to say, what do I absolutely have to execute? And the rest of it is over here for discussion. If everybody was to do it that way and come back, then we'd have a much more productive talk.
But remember, you do not have my recommended budget yet.
I understand
Okay.
that, but whenever we do look at the whole big
And
picture, we
that's-
have got to find stuff that we can use, take away, tweak, to move monies and dollars to areas that are lacking and deficient, like the landfill. You know, to close it's millions, to keep it open it's millions, you know, what do? But anyway, it's still, we gotta get rid of our trash somehow. But we've gotta look everywhere we can cut to offset what is draining us and stop the bleeding and tighten our belt in every area. And we can't look at one entity, the landfill, and say, we gotta make it profitable today, bam, we gonna hit the people with unbelievable tax increases.
You're gonna have to.
That's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to look at the whole entire city. Where can I slimline? And at the end of the day, you cut and slim and trim, and then you see where you're at, and then you make the offsets where you're deficient.
Let me go back one thing further. You're gonna have this budget to us pretty soon. We're gonna talk, we're gonna be able to talk before the council election. It's one thing I've asked you before. We're gonna find out the status of who's running, and are they for a tax increase to fund this whole thing as it has been, or they wanna make the cuts? I think that the people deserve that. I think there's some people that wanna keep this, and this because it sounds politically good, but there's also, there has to be the answer, you gotta pay for what you get. You can't go in a restaurant and eat for free. Okay, and the city's eating for free. A lot of people have eaten for free way too long, and I think the people deserve to know if any council person running is gonna raise the taxes so you can keep Joe Bob's job. That's what it's gonna come down to. And I'm sorry, Joe Bob can get 6 months of unemployment like anybody else. Thank you, Mr. Reeves. It's the most professional presentation that I have ever witnessed from a city manager. And I know you had good staffing to do that, Ms. Spradlin, and I know you've had assistants help you and so forth. All these gentlemen, thank you for being here this morning. Most professional I've ever seen.
Thank
And
you.
I commend you, sir.
Did you have fun?
Hey, this is nothing. Go up here and point in the fourth circuit of the
You're
Supreme
gonna go
Court.
home and watch this whole thing again on YouTube, aren't you? You had
If
so
you're not
much
having fun, you don't enjoy it, what the heck?
Thank you. I mean,
Yeah,
Thank y'all.
good job.
Can I ask one question before we dismiss? Thursday is the outside agency funding requests. I think we had one council member ask for it, the information early. I do not have the summary sheet finished because I still have to contact them and ask a couple questions. But if you want a paper copy packet, this is what it is. You can pick that up today. But I also have PDFs of each agency. If you want all the agencies emailed to you, I can do that on Monday. Or if you want just the non-mandated agencies emailed to you, I can do that as well. If council will just let me know what you would like before Thursday.
yeah, if you can get those to us, I've asked Mr. Mayor, that there's no use us having a bunch of people that we're not going, there's no way in the world they're gonna get a penny. Realistically, and I think you can get consensus from this council to who we can say to come. I wouldn't wanna see them waste their time, and I don't wanna have them waste our time with something they're not gonna get anything out of.
Well, I can tell you right now, it's a like to have, so they're the last thing we talk about. It's a like to have until we cover everything else, so.